Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I've been on SWAT for 11 years. 11 years of breaching doors, clearing rooms, and coming home to my wife pretending everything was normal. But there's one call that still sits in my chest like a weight I can't shake off. It happened on a Tuesday night in October 15th, 2019. I remember because it was my daughter's birthday the next day, and I'd promised her I'd be home to make pancakes. We got the call at 11:47 p.m. Barricaded suspect, 2847 Clement Avenue. Domestic disturbance that had escalated when patrol units arrived. The guy, Marcus Chen, 34, unemployed IT worker, had allegedly threatened his estranged wife with a knife when she came to collect some belongings. When the first responders showed up, he'd locked himself inside and stopped responding to negotiation attempts. Simple enough. We'd done 100 of these. The house was a small 2-story Craftsman in what used to be a decent neighborhood. By the time we arrived, the whole street was lit up like a movie set. Patrol cars, ambulances, fire trucks. The kind of chaos that makes neighbors stand on their porches in bathrobes, filming with their phones. Lieutenant Rodriguez briefed us in the command vehicle. Chen's wife was safe, already transported to the hospital with minor cuts on her arms. No kids in the house, thank God. The suspect had been quiet for the past 40 minutes. No response to phone calls, no movement visible through the windows. Standard containment had been established. Our job was to go in, secure the premises, and bring him out. I was point man that night. Harris and Murphy flanked me, with Rodriguez calling plays from outside. We'd worked together for 3 years. We knew each other's breathing patterns, could read each other's body language through all the tactical gear. That's what made us good. The front door was solid oak, reinforced. We positioned ourselves, ran through the signals one more time. I remember Harris adjusting his helmet cam, the small beep it made when it switched on. I remember the weight of the ram in my hands, how the metal felt cold even through my gloves. Breach, breach, breach. The door splintered inward on the second hit. We flowed in like we'd practiced 1,000 times. Smooth, efficient, covering our angles. The living room was dark, except for the glow from a television playing some late-night infomercial with the sound muted. The house smelled wrong, not like fear or violence, but like cleaning products. Industrial strength bleach. That should have been my first clue. We cleared the ground floor room by room, kitchen, dining room, bathroom. Everything was immaculate. Not just clean, sterile, like someone had spent hours scrubbing every surface. The sink in the kitchen was still damp, and there were rubber gloves draped over the edge, the kind you use for heavy-duty cleaning. Upstairs, Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio. Suspect likely in the master bedroom. The staircase was narrow, carpet worn thin in the middle from years of foot traffic. Each step creaked despite our efforts to move quietly. The second-floor hallway stretched ahead of us, 3 doors visible in the beam of our flashlights. 2 bedrooms and a bathroom, according to the floor plan Rodriguez had shown us. The first bedroom was empty, a guest room, mostly unused. The second was clearly a home office, computer desk, filing cabinets, bookshelves. But the computer was gone, leaving only a rectangle of dust where it had been sitting. The cables were still there, neatly coiled and tied. That should have been my second clue. The master bedroom door was closed. We took our positions, Harris and Murphy on either side, me with the ram. Through the radio, I could hear Rodriguez coordinating with the negotiator outside, trying one more time to get Chen to respond. Nothing. I looked at Harris. He nodded. Murphy's finger was on his trigger, but pointed down and away. Proper protocol. I remember thinking how quiet it was inside the house, how the sound of our breathing seemed amplified in the confined space. The master bedroom door wasn't locked. It swung open easily, and we flowed in with our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The room was empty. Not just empty, completely stripped. No furniture, no personal belongings, no signs that anyone had lived there recently. The carpet had been shampooed, the walls wiped down. Even the closet was bare except for a few wire hangers. What the hell? Murphy's voice was barely a whisper. I keyed my radio. "Lieutenant, we've got a problem up here." That's when we heard it. A sound from downstairs, the distinct creak of the front door opening. The door we'd breached, the door that should have been secured by the officers outside. All units. Rodriguez's voice was tight with confusion. "We've got movement at the front of the house." We moved back downstairs, faster this time. Protocol loosening in the face of something we didn't understand. The front door was standing open. Cold October air flowing in. The officers who were supposed to be maintaining the perimeter were nowhere to be seen. I stepped outside, my flashlight sweeping across the front yard. Our command vehicle was still there, but the area around it was empty. No patrol officers, no paramedics, no neighbors on porches. The street was completely silent. "Rodriguez," I called into my radio. "Static. Command, this is Alpha Team." Nothing. Harris was behind me, his weapon drawn. "Where is everyone?" I wish I could tell you. That's when it all made sense, when the pieces clicked into place and we figured out what was happening. But the truth is, I still don't know, not completely. What I do know is that when we walked back toward the command vehicle, we found a manila envelope on the hood. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an address, the address of the house we'd just cleared, and a note. "Thank you for your service. The cleaning supplies are in the garage." In the garage, we found industrial-grade bleach, hydrogen peroxide, and several bottles of luminol, the kind crime scene investigators use to detect blood that's been cleaned up. There were also detailed floor plans of the house, marked with what looked like cleanup protocols. We called for backup, but by then it was almost 3 a.m. and the radio chatter was different. Dispatch sounded confused, like they weren't sure why. We were where we were. The original call about Marcus Chen and his wife? There was no record of it in the system. I've read our incident report dozens of times since that night. According to the official record, we responded to a noise complaint at 2847 Clemont Avenue. No domestic disturbance, no barricaded suspect, no Marcus Chen. Just a routine check on a house that had been vacant for 3 months. But I remember the weight of that ram in my hands. I remember the smell of bleach. I remember Harris adjusting his helmet cam, the small beep it made when it switched on. I've tried to find Marcus Chen. I've searched every database I have access to, run his name through every system. He doesn't exist. Neither does his wife. The hospital has no record of treating anyone that night for cuts on their arms. The thing about being a cop is that you learn to trust your instincts. After 11 years, you know when something feels wrong. Your gut tells you to be careful, to look twice, to question what you're seeing. But what happens when your instincts are telling you one thing and every official record is telling you something else? I started digging deeper into that night about a week later. I couldn't let it go. I pulled the dispatch logs, the radio transcripts, even the GPS data from our patrol units. According to the computer systems, we'd responded to a simple noise complaint at 11:47 p.m. No domestic violence call, no barricaded suspect, no emergency response. Just a routine check on a house that neighbors had reported as being too quiet. Too quiet, that's what the official report said. Not too loud, too quiet. I asked Harris about it the next day. We were in the equipment room, cleaning our gear after a training exercise. Standard procedure: check your weapon, inventory your equipment. Make sure everything's accounted for. But when I brought up Clemont Avenue, Harris looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "What house?" he said. We didn't run any calls Tuesday night. Rodriguez had us doing equipment maintenance in the garage. I stared at him. "You don't remember?" "The barricaded suspect, Marcus Chen?" Harris shook his head slowly. "Man, you feeling all right? We were here all night. Ask Murphy." So I asked Murphy. Same response. Same confused look. Same insistence that Tuesday night had been quiet, that we'd spent the entire shift doing routine maintenance and paperwork. I started questioning my own memory. Post-traumatic stress can do funny things to your mind. I'd seen it happen to other officers. They'd remember things that didn't happen, or forget things that did. The human brain isn't designed to process the kind of stress we put it through on a regular basis. But I remembered details that felt too specific to be false memories. The weight of the ram, the sound of Harris's helmet cam, the smell of bleach, the manila envelope on the hood of the command vehicle. I went back to Clemont Avenue on my day off, drove there in my personal vehicle, parked across the street, and just sat there for an hour. The house looked different in daylight, smaller, shabbier. The paint was peeling, the lawn was overgrown, and there was a for sale sign in the front yard that looked like it had been there for months. I knocked on the neighbor's door. An elderly woman answered, wearing a housecoat and slippers even though it was 2 in the afternoon. I showed her my badge, explained that I was following up on a noise complaint from the previous week. "Oh, that place has been empty for months," she said. "Ever since the Hendersons moved out. Nice family, but they couldn't keep up with the mortgage payments. Bank took it back in July. Have you seen anyone coming or going recently? Any activity at all?" She thought for a moment. "Well, there were some people there last week. Tuesday night, I think. Cleaning crew or something. Had a big truck, lots of equipment. Made quite a bit of noise, actually. I almost called the police, but they were gone by morning. A cleaning crew. Tuesday night. The same night we'd supposedly responded to the house. I asked her what time she'd seen them. She said it was late. After midnight, maybe 1 a.m. Around the same time we would have been clearing the house. I drove home with more questions than answers. If there had been a cleaning crew at the house, why wasn't there any record of it? Why didn't Harris and Murphy remember being there? And why did I have such vivid memories of something that officially never happened? That night, I pulled out my personal laptop and started searching for Marcus Chen. Not through police databases this time, but through social media, employment records, public information. I found dozens of Marcus Chens, but none that matched the description from the briefing. None that were 34, unemployed IT workers, none that had been involved in domestic disputes. I even called the hospital where Chen's wife had supposedly been treated. The nurse I spoke with was polite but firm. They had no record of treating anyone for knife wounds that night. No domestic violence victims, no women with cuts on their arms. It was like the entire incident had been erased from existence. Except for my memories. I started keeping a notebook. Every detail I could remember about that night I wrote down. The layout of the house, the smell of cleaning products, the sound of our boots on the stairs. I drew diagrams of the rooms, marked where we'd found evidence, noted every conversation I could recall. The notebook became an obsession. I'd write in it during breaks at work, in the car while waiting for calls, at home after my wife had gone to sleep. I filled page after page with details, trying to capture every moment before my memory could fade or change. But the more I wrote, the more I started to doubt myself. Some details felt crystal clear: the weight of the RAM, the manila envelope, the empty command vehicle. But others were fuzzy, inconsistent. Had Rodriguez been in the command vehicle or on the radio? Had Murphy been on my left or my right when we breached the bedroom door? Memory is fragile. It changes every time you access it, like a file that gets corrupted each time you open it. The more I tried to remember that night, the less certain I became about what had actually happened. But I kept writing, because even if my memory was unreliable, even if I was going crazy, something had happened that night. Something that left me with questions I couldn't answer and a feeling in my gut that refused to go away. The feeling that I'd been used, that someone had orchestrated the entire event, used my team to accomplish something, and then erased all evidence that it had ever occurred. 3 weeks after Clemont Avenue, I was assigned to a new case. Not SWAT work. Rodriguez had put me on administrative duty pending a psychological evaluation. Standard procedure when an officer starts showing signs of stress or confusion. I wasn't suspended, just reassigned to desk work while the department shrink decided whether I was fit for active duty. The case was a missing person report. Janet Malloy, 67, hadn't been seen by her neighbors in 4 days. Her daughter had called from Oregon, worried because her mother hadn't answered her phone. Patrol had done a welfare check, found the house secure, but no sign of Mrs. Malloy. No signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. Just an empty house and a woman who'd vanished without a trace. I was supposed to interview the neighbors, check local hospitals, follow up on any leads. Routine detective work. But when I saw the address, 2851 Clemont Avenue, my blood went cold. 4 houses down from where we'd breached that door. 4 houses down from the house that may or may not have existed in the way I remembered it. I drove to the address with my hands shaking. Janet Malloy's house was a mirror image of 2847, same craftsman style, same small front yard, same narrow driveway. But this one was lived in. Garden gnomes on the porch, newspapers stacked by the front door, a car in the driveway with a thin layer of dust on the windshield. I knocked on the door, no answer. Used my flashlight to peer through the windows. The living room was furnished but empty. No signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, no evidence that anything violent had occurred. I walked around to the backyard. The rear door was unlocked. Standard procedure would be to wait for backup, call for a warrant, follow protocol. But I was already breaking protocol just by being there alone. And something about the unlocked door felt familiar, like déjà vu. I stepped inside. The house smelled like cleaning products. Not as strong as 2847, but the same industrial bleach smell that had hit me the night we breached the door. I moved through the rooms methodically, checking each space, looking for signs of Janet Malloy or evidence of what had happened to her. The kitchen was spotless. Too clean for a house where someone had been living. The sink was dry. The counters wiped down, the refrigerator humming but empty except for a few condiments and a carton of milk that had expired 3 days ago. Upstairs, I found the same pattern. The bedrooms were neat, organized, but somehow lifeless, like they'd been cleaned and arranged by someone who didn't actually live there. The master bedroom had personal items, photos on the nightstand, clothes in the closet, reading glasses on the bedside table, but they felt staged like props in a movie set. In the bathroom, I found something that made my heart race. A small plastic bag in the trash can, the kind used for medical waste. Inside were cotton swabs stained with what looked like blood, and a syringe with a bent needle. I photographed everything with my phone, then called it in. But when backup arrived, when the crime scene techs processed the house, when the report was filed, there was no mention of the medical waste. According to the official investigation, Janet Malloy had simply disappeared, leaving behind a clean house and no evidence of foul play. The bag I'd found in the bathroom was gone. The photos on my phone were there, but when I showed them to the investigating detective, he looked at me like I was losing my mind. "That's not blood," he said. "That's makeup remover, and that's not a syringe. It's an eyedropper. Mrs. Malloy probably had glaucoma or something. Used eye drops." I looked at the photos again. He was right. What I'd thought was blood looked like mascara residue. What I'd thought was a syringe looked like a small glass dropper. But I could have sworn I knew the difference between blood and makeup, between a syringe and an eyedropper. I'd seen both enough times to know. But the photos didn't lie, and neither did the detective's analysis. Janet Malloy was never found. The case went cold after 2 weeks. According to the official report, she'd likely suffered some kind of mental health episode, wandered off, and either died from exposure or started a new life somewhere else. It happens more often than people think, especially with elderly individuals experiencing early-stage dementia. But I kept thinking about the smell of bleach, about the unlocked door, about the medical waste that wasn't medical waste. I started walking the neighborhood during my off hours, talking to residents, asking questions about both houses. What I found was a pattern that made my skin crawl. 2847 Clemont Avenue, the house where we'd supposedly breached the door, had been empty for months. But neighbors reported seeing activity there regularly. Cleaning crews, maintenance workers, people coming and going at all hours. Always late at night, always gone by morning. 2851 Clemont Avenue, Janet Malloy's house, had been quiet for weeks before she disappeared. But neighbors remembered seeing her talking to various service people. Home health aides, cleaning services, repair technicians. More than seemed normal for an elderly woman living alone. I found similar patterns at other houses in the neighborhood. Empty homes that showed signs of regular activity despite being officially vacant. Occupied homes where residents had disappeared or died under circumstances that seemed natural but left questions unanswered. The more I investigated, the more I realized that Clemont Avenue wasn't just a street. It was a laboratory. Someone was using these houses, using the people who lived in them for something. And they were using law enforcement, using us, to clean up the evidence. I started mapping the connections, drawing lines between houses, between cases, between incidents that seemed unrelated, but shared too many similarities to be coincidental. My notebook filled with diagrams, timelines, lists of names and addresses. My wife found the notebook one evening while I was at work. When I came home, she was sitting at the kitchen table with it open in front of her, tears in her eyes. "What is this?" she asked. "What's happening to you?" I tried to explain. About Clemont Avenue, about the missing memories, about the pattern I was uncovering. But as I talked, I could see the fear growing in her eyes. Not fear of whatever conspiracy I thought I'd discovered, but fear of what I was becoming. She made me promise to see the department psychologist, to get help, to stop investigating cases that weren't assigned to me, stop obsessing over details that nobody else could remember. I promised, but I kept the notebook. Because even if I was losing my mind, even if everything I thought I knew was wrong, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening on Clemont Avenue. something that used people like Janet Malloy, used people like me, and then erased all evidence of its existence. Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to the Marcus Chen who may or may not have existed, was the department psychologist. I'd been seeing her twice a week for a month, and she was starting to make progress. At least, that's what she told me. The sessions were in a small office on the third floor of the municipal building. Neutral colors, comfortable chairs, a box of tissues strategically placed on the side table. She was good at her job, asking the right questions, listening without judgment, helping me understand the difference between memory and imagination. Trauma can manifest in many ways, she explained during our 5th session. Sometimes the mind creates elaborate scenarios to cope with stress or guilt. It's not lying, it's protecting itself. I nodded, playing along, but I couldn't stop thinking about the smell of bleach. "Tell me about your childhood," she said. "Any experiences with cleaning products? Strong chemical smells?" I told her about helping my mother clean the house when I was young, how she'd use bleach to scrub the bathroom tiles, how the smell would burn my nose and make my eyes water, how I'd associated that smell with safety, with home, with things being clean and orderly. "Perhaps," Dr. Chen suggested, "your mind is using that familiar smell to process unfamiliar trauma. The stress of the job, the pressure of making life and death decisions, the weight of responsibility, all of that gets translated into sensory memories that feel real but aren't based in actual events." It made sense. It was logical, scientific, based on decades of research into how the mind processes trauma. But it didn't explain why I could still smell bleach sometimes, walking down the street, sitting in my car, lying in bed at night. After 6 weeks of sessions, Dr. Chen cleared me for active duty. I was psychologically fit, she said. My stress levels were normal, my memory was reliable, and my judgment was sound. The incidents I'd been concerned about were likely the result of fatigue and job-related stress, now resolved through therapy and proper rest. I was assigned back to SWAT the following Monday. Rodriguez welcomed me back with a handshake and a smile. "Good to have you back," he said. "We've got a situation developing. Could use your expertise." The briefing was at 10:30 p.m. Armed robbery in progress at a pawn shop on the east side. The suspect had barricaded himself inside with at least 2 hostages. Patrol units were establishing a perimeter. Our job was to assess the situation and determine whether a tactical response was necessary. Standard procedure, nothing unusual. Nothing that should have triggered the anxiety that started building in my chest as soon as Rodriguez mentioned the address. The pawn shop was on Clemont Avenue, number 2823. I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked for clarification. "Are we sure about the address?" Rodriguez looked at me strangely. "Problem with the location?" "No, sir, just familiarizing myself with the area." But my hands were shaking as I loaded my equipment. The same tremor I'd felt the night we breached 2847. The same cold sweat, the same feeling that something was wrong with the intelligence we'd been given. The ride to the scene was quiet. Harris and Murphy made small talk about the weather, about their kids, about anything except the job ahead. I stared out the window, watching the street numbers decrease as we approached our destination. I held my breath as we passed Janet Malloy's house. It was dark, empty, with a new "for sale" sign in the front yard. No signs of the investigation that had consumed weeks of my life. The pawn shop was exactly where it was supposed to be. 2823 Clemont Avenue, wedged between a dry cleaner and a used bookstore. Both neighboring businesses were closed for the night, their windows dark, their parking lots empty. But something was wrong with the scene. The patrol cars were there, the perimeter was established, but there was no sense of urgency. No negotiator on a bullhorn, no ambulances standing by, no crowd of onlookers being held back by police tape. "Where are the hostages?" I asked Rodriguez. He checked his notes. "Should be 2 civilians inside, employees who were working late." I counted the patrol cars. 4 units, 8 officers. For a situation involving an armed suspect and 2 hostages, that was light coverage. Usually we'd have twice that many officers, plus paramedics, plus supervisors from multiple departments. We approached the building with our standard formation. The front windows were covered with security bars, making it impossible to see inside. The front door was steel, reinforced, with multiple locks. A professionally installed security system that would be difficult to breach quickly. Rodriguez tried to make contact with the suspect through the loudspeaker. "This is the police. We know you're inside. We want to talk." No response. "We're here to help. Nobody needs to get hurt." Still nothing. I was studying the building's layout when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The security camera above the front door was pointed down, its lens covered with what looked like black electrical tape. The cameras on the neighboring buildings were similarly disabled. "Lieutenant," I said, "when was the last time anyone actually saw the suspect?" Rodriguez checked his radio log. Initial report came in at 9:47. Patrol units arrived at 10:15. No visual contact since then. "And the hostages?" "No communication. Phones inside aren't answering." I felt that familiar weight in my chest. The same feeling I'd had at 28:47. The same certainty that we were being fed false information. "Sir, I recommend we verify the intelligence before proceeding." Something doesn't feel right about this. Rodriguez looked at me with concern. "You feeling okay? This is standard procedure." But it wasn't standard. The lack of backup, the disabled cameras, the silence from inside the building, none of it fit the pattern of a typical armed robbery. It felt orchestrated, planned, like someone wanted us here for a specific purpose. I looked at Harris and Murphy. They seemed relaxed, confident, ready to follow orders without question. Either they didn't see what I was seeing, or they were seeing something completely different. "Breach the door," Rodriguez ordered. I hefted the ram, feeling its familiar weight, but this time, instead of confidence, I felt dread. The same dread I'd felt standing outside 2847. The same certainty that whatever was behind this door would change everything. The door splintered on the first hit. We flowed inside, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The pawn shop was small, cramped, filled with the usual collection of electronics, jewelry, and musical instruments. But like the house on Clemont Avenue, it smelled wrong. Not cleaning products this time, something else. Something metallic and sharp that made my nose burn. We cleared the front room methodically. No suspect, no hostages, no signs of struggle. Just rows of merchandise and a cash register that was still locked and undisturbed. The back room was where we found them. 2 bodies, both employees, both dead for what looked like several hours. Not from gunshot wounds or knife attacks, but from something that had left them looking peaceful, almost asleep. On the floor next to them was a small glass vial, empty, with a label I recognized from my research into Janet Malloy's disappearance. A pharmaceutical compound used for euthanasia in medical settings. "Jesus Christ," Murphy whispered. I keyed my radio to call for the coroner, but Rodriguez's voice cut me off. "Stand down. We'll handle this." "Sir, we have 2 bodies. We need to process the scene." I said, "Stand down." Rodriguez's voice was different. Not the calm, professional tone I'd known for 3 years, but something harder, more authoritative. Like he was following orders from someone else. That's when I noticed the manila envelope on the counter. Same size, same color as the one we'd found at 2847. Inside was a single sheet of paper with our names, mine, Harris's, Murphy's, and a note. Thank you for your service. The cleaning supplies are in the storage room. The storage room was exactly what you'd expect to find behind a pawn shop. Shelves lined with inventory, boxes of merchandise waiting to be processed, filing cabinets full of transaction records. But tucked away in the corner, behind a stack of old televisions, was a metal cabinet that didn't belong. Inside the cabinet were the same industrial cleaning supplies we'd found at 2847. Bleach, hydrogen peroxide, luminol. But there were also other things. Medical supplies, syringes, small glass vials labeled with chemical names I didn't recognize, and photographs, dozens of them. Surveillance photos of houses on Clement Avenue, of residents coming and going, of police officers, including me, approaching various addresses. In one photo, I was standing outside Janet Malloy's house, talking to the elderly neighbor. In another, I was sitting in my car across from 2847, watching the empty building. Someone had been documenting my investigation, tracking my movements, cataloging my obsession with the street. "What the hell is this?" Harris asked, looking over my shoulder. But when I turned around, Harris wasn't there. Neither was Murphy. I was alone in the storage room, surrounded by evidence of something I didn't understand. I called out for them. No response. I walked back through the pawn shop, checking every corner, every hiding spot. The building was empty except for the two bodies in the back room. Outside, the scene had changed. The patrol cars were gone. The perimeter had been lifted. The street was quiet, normal, like nothing had ever happened. I tried my radio, static. I tried my cell phone, no signal. I walked back to where our command vehicle should have been parked. It was gone. In its place was a different car, a black sedan with tinted windows. The engine was running, the driver's door open, the keys in the ignition. On the passenger seat was another manila envelope. This one contained my badge, my weapon, and a letter of resignation dated 3 months in the future. The letter was typed on department letterhead, signed with my name in handwriting that looked like mine but felt foreign. The letter cited personal reasons for my departure from the police force: stress, family obligations, a desire to pursue other opportunities. It was professional, polite, and completely fictional. Underneath the resignation letter was a psychiatric evaluation. Dr. Sarah Chen's signature at the bottom, recommending that I be placed on permanent disability due to stress-related psychosis. The evaluation described my obsession with Clement Avenue, my false memories of incidents that never occurred, my inability to distinguish between reality and delusion. According to the report, I was a danger to myself and others, unfit for duty, requiring immediate medical intervention and long-term psychiatric care. I stood in the empty street, holding documents that described a future I hadn't chosen, a diagnosis I hadn't received, a fate that had been decided for me by people I'd never met. The sedan's engine continued to idle, waiting for me to get inside, to drive away, to accept whatever role I was supposed to play in this elaborate performance. Instead, I walked back to the pawn shop. The front door was locked now, the security bars in place, the building dark and silent. But I could still smell that metallic scent, still feel the weight of what I'd seen in the back room. I used the ram I'd left inside to break the lock. The door splintered, and I stepped back into the darkness. The bodies were gone. The storage room was empty. The photographs, the medical supplies, the cleaning products, all of it had vanished. The building looked like it had been professionally cleaned, sanitized, restored to its original state. On the counter where the manila envelope had been, there was now a receipt. A purchase order for cleaning services, dated that night, paid for by a company I'd never heard of. The service description was simple: complete decontamination and restoration. I walked through the building one more time, looking for any trace of what I'd seen. But it was like the bodies had never existed, like the evidence had been a hallucination, like the entire night had been a product of my deteriorating mind, except for the smell. That metallic scent lingered in the air, faint but unmistakable. The smell of something that had been alive and wasn't anymore. I left the pawn shop and walked back to the sedan. The engine was still running, the documents still waiting on the passenger seat. But now there was something else. A GPS device, already programmed with a destination. An address I didn't recognize in a city I'd never visited. The screen showed a route that would take me away from Clement Avenue, away from the neighborhood I'd been investigating, away from the life I'd built over 11 years of police work. I got in the car, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know what else to do. The alternative was to stay on Clement Avenue, to continue investigating incidents that officially never happened, to pursue suspects who didn't exist, and victims who had vanished without a trace. The GPS spoke in a calm, female voice. Proceed to the highlighted route. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, I could see the pawn shop receding into the distance. Its windows dark, its secrets buried beneath layers of professional cleaning and official documentation. But I could still smell that metallic scent. And I knew that somewhere, in some other city, on some other street, there was another officer like me. Another SWAT team getting ready to breach a door they shouldn't open, to clear a scene they weren't meant to understand. The GPS continued to guide me through the empty streets, away from everything I'd known, toward a destination I couldn't imagine. In half a mile, turn right. I turned right, following orders I didn't understand, from people I'd never met, toward a purpose I couldn't fathom. The city lights grew smaller in my rearview mirror. The radio played soft music, interrupted occasionally by traffic reports and weather updates. Normal sounds from a normal world, where none of this had ever happened. Continue straight for 15 miles. I continued straight, driving through the night, carrying documents that proved I was insane and memories that proved I wasn't. Somewhere behind me, Clement Avenue was returning to normal. The houses were quiet, the streets were empty, and the only evidence of what had happened was a faint smell of bleach and the ghost of a police officer who'd asked too many questions. I drove for 3 hours before I had to stop. The GPS had taken me through small towns and rural highways, past empty fields and sleeping neighborhoods, toward a destination that seemed to be getting farther away with each mile. The gas station was one of those 24-hour places that survive on truck drivers and insomniacs. Fluorescent lights, energy drinks, and coffee that had been sitting in the pot since the previous afternoon. The kind of place where nobody asks questions and everybody minds their own business. I filled the tank and went inside to pay. The clerk was a kid, maybe 19, with tattoos covering his arms and a look of profound boredom. He glanced at me briefly, then back at his phone. "That'll be $37.50, he said without looking up. I handed him 2 20s and waited for change. That's when I noticed the security camera above the register was pointing down, its lens covered with black electrical tape, just like the cameras at the pawn shop. "Camera broken?" I asked. The kid looked up, confused. "What camera?" I pointed to the obvious security system mounted on the wall. He followed my gaze, then looked back, at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "There's no camera there, man, just the smoke detector." I looked again. He was right. What I thought was a disabled security camera was just a standard smoke detector. White plastic with a small red LED. Nothing unusual about it at all. "Sorry," I said. "Long night." He shrugged and handed me my change. As I walked back to the car, I caught a glimpse of myself in the storefront window. I looked like hell. 3 days of stubble, dark circles under my eyes. The kind of exhaustion that comes from somewhere deeper than just lack of sleep. The GPS came back to life as soon as I started the engine. "In 2 miles, turn left onto Route 47. I followed the directions because I didn't have anywhere else to go. My apartment was back in the city, but according to the resignation letter in the envelope, I wouldn't be needing it much longer. My wife was probably asleep, unaware that her husband had disappeared into the night with a car full of documents that proved he was losing his mind. Route 47 was a 2-lane highway that cut through farmland and forest. No street lights, no other traffic, just the black sedan's headlights cutting through the darkness. The kind of road where you could drive for hours without seeing another human being. After 20 minutes, the GPS announced my destination. In 500 feet, turn right onto Maple Ridge Road. Maple Ridge Road wasn't on any map I'd ever seen. It was barely wide enough for one car, unpaved, cutting through dense woods that seemed to swallow the headlights. The GPS showed my location as a blank spot. No roads or landmarks marked. After another mile, I saw lights ahead. Not street lights or house lights, but something industrial. Floodlights mounted on tall poles, illuminating a compound of low buildings surrounded by chain-link fence. The GPS guided me to a gatehouse where a security guard was waiting. He was dressed in a uniform I didn't recognize. Not police, not military, not private security. Something else. "Officer Williams," he said as I rolled down the window, "we've been expecting you." I hadn't told anyone my name. It wasn't on the car registration, wasn't displayed anywhere visible, but somehow he knew who I was. "Where am I?" I asked. "Processing facility," he said, handing me a visitor's badge. "Follow the road to Building 7. Someone will meet you there." The gate opened automatically. I drove through, following signs that directed me past several identical buildings. Each one was windowless, unmarked, surrounded by parking lots that were empty except for a few black sedans identical to the one I was driving. Building 7 was larger than the others, with loading docks and what looked like medical equipment visible through partially open bay doors. I parked in a space marked Visiting Personnel and walked to the main entrance. The lobby was sterile, professional, like a medical clinic or government office. Tile floors, fluorescent lighting, chairs arranged in neat rows. Behind a reception desk sat a woman in her 40s, dressed in scrubs, typing on a computer. "Officer Williams," she said without looking up. "Right on time." "I think there's been a mistake," I said. "I'm not sure why I'm here." She finally looked at me, her expression patient but not particularly sympathetic. "Dr. Chen is waiting for you in conference room 3. Down the hall, second door on the left." Dr. Chen. The same Dr. Chen who'd been treating me for stress-related psychosis. The same Dr. Chen who'd signed the psychiatric evaluation that declared me unfit for duty. I found conference room 3 and knocked on the door. A familiar voice called for me to enter. Dr. Chen was sitting at a conference table with 2 other people I didn't recognize, a man in a business suit and a woman in medical scrubs. In front of them were files, documents, and a laptop displaying what looked like surveillance footage. "Please, sit down," Dr. Chen said, gesturing to a chair across from them. I remained standing. "What is this place?" "This is where we help people like you," she said. people who've seen things they weren't supposed to see, who remember things that officially never happened. The man in the suit opened one of the files. "Officer Williams, you've been investigating incidents on Clement Avenue for the past 2 months. Despite being told repeatedly that these incidents didn't occur, you've continued to pursue leads that don't exist and suspects who were never real." "Marcus Chen was real," I said. "Janet Malloy was real. The pawn shop robbery was a psychological exercise," the woman in scrubs interrupted, "designed to help you process trauma in a controlled environment. Everything you experienced was carefully orchestrated to allow your mind to work through the stress of your job." Dr. Chen pulled out a tablet and showed me footage from what looked like the pawn shop. But in this version, there were no bodies in the back room, no medica, supplies in the storage room. Just me, alone, talking to people who weren't there, responding to situations that existed only in my mind. "The human brain is remarkably resilient," Dr. Chen explained. "When faced with trauma, it can't process. It creates elaborate scenarios to make sense of the incomprehensible. What you've been experiencing isn't reality. It's your mind's way of coping with the stress of being a police officer." I watched the footage of myself clearing empty rooms, talking to invisible suspects, finding evidence that wasn't there. It was convincing, professional, the kind of thing that would hold up in court or a psychiatric evaluation. The cleaning supplies, the manila envelopes, the disabled cameras, all of it was carefully designed to trigger specific responses, the man in the suit said. "We've been studying stress-related psychosis in law enforcement for years. You're part of a pilot program to develop better treatment protocols." "Then why don't I remember volunteering for this program?" "Because voluntary participation would compromise the results," Dr. Chen said. "Your responses needed to be genuine, unfiltered by conscious knowledge of the experiment." The woman in scrubs slid a document across the table. "This is your consent form, signed 3 months ago, when you first reported stress-related symptoms to your supervisor." I looked at the document. My signature at the bottom, witnessed and notarized. Legal authorization for experimental psychiatric treatment, including the use of controlled scenarios and memory modification techniques. But I didn't remember signing it. I didn't remember reporting stress symptoms to Rodriguez. I didn't remember volunteering for anything. "The good news, Doctor," Chen continued, "is that the treatment has been successful. Your stress levels have decreased significantly, and you're no longer experiencing the nightmares and anxiety attacks that brought you into the program. What happens now?" "Now you complete the program," the man in the suit said. "You'll spend the next 2 weeks here, undergoing debriefing and memory consolidation. When you leave, you'll remember your time as a police officer fondly, without the trauma that was destroying your mental health." "And if I refuse?" Dr. Chen's expression didn't change. "Officer Williams, you've been declared unfit for duty due to stress-related psychosis. You're currently experiencing a complete break from reality. The choice isn't whether to accept treatment. It's whether to accept treatment here, in a comfortable facility designed to help you, or in a state psychiatric hospital where the accommodations are less pleasant." I looked around the conference room. Clean, professional, designed to look like a place where decisions were made collaboratively. But the door was closed, the windows were barred, and I was beginning to understand that I wasn't here as a patient seeking help. I was here as a problem that needed to be solved. The room they gave me was on the 3rd floor, with a view of the parking lot and the fence that surrounded the compound. Comfortable bed, private bathroom, television with cable channels. It looked like a hotel room, if you ignored the fact that the windows didn't open and the door locked from the outside. I spent the first day trying to understand what was happening to me, The documents in the manila envelope were convincing. Psychiatric evaluations, treatment consent forms, medical records showing a pattern of deteriorating mental health that justified involuntary commitment. According to the files, I'd been struggling with stress-related psychosis for months. Paranoid delusions, false memories, inability to distinguish between reality and hallucination. The incidents on Clemont Avenue were symptoms of a complete psychological breakdown, manifestations of a mind that could no longer cope with the demands of police work. It was all very logical, very scientific, very believable. Except for the smell. Even here, in this sterile medical facility, I could still smell bleach. Not the industrial cleaning products from the houses on Clemont Avenue, but something else. Something that reminded me of hospitals, of morgues, of places where people went to die quietly and efficiently. On the second day, they started the debriefing sessions. Dr. Chen would sit across from me in a small office, asking questions about my memories, helping me understand which experiences were real and which were products of my diseased mind. "Tell me about the first time you smelled bleach," she would say. I told her about my mother, about cleaning the bathroom as a child, about the association between chemical smells and safety. She nodded, taking notes, explaining how trauma could twist childhood memories into adult delusions. And Marcus Chen? The barricaded suspect? "A projection," I said, repeating what she'd taught me. My mind created a scenario that would allow me to feel useful, heroic, important. The name Chen came from you. My subconscious borrowed it because you represent safety and healing. Very good. And the house on Clemont Avenue? Empty. Had been empty for months. I projected my own psychological emptiness onto the physical space, imagining evidence that wasn't there. She smiled, pleased with my progress, but I could see something else in her eyes. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction. Like I was performing exactly as expected. After a week of sessions, I was allowed to walk around the compound. Always escorted, always supervised, but given the illusion of freedom within the carefully controlled environment. The other buildings housed different departments. Medical research, psychological testing, what looked like data analysis facilities. Through windows, I could see people in lab coats working with computers, examining specimens, reviewing documents. In Building 4, I saw something that made me stop walking. Through a partially open door, I caught a glimpse of a storage room filled with familiar supplies. Industrial bleach, medical equipment, cleaning products, and photographs, surveillance images of houses, of people, of police officers responding to various scenarios. My escort, a pleasant young man who introduced himself as a graduate student, noticed my interest. "What's in there?" I asked. "Research materials," he said. Dr. Chen's team studies environmental factors that trigger psychological episodes. They recreate conditions that might cause stress reactions in law enforcement personnel. Conditions like the smell of bleach? Exactly. Sensory triggers that can be used therapeutically to help patients process trauma in controlled settings. We kept walking, but I couldn't stop thinking about those photographs. The faces I'd seen looked familiar, but not in a way that suggested false memories or psychological projection. They looked familiar in the way that real people look familiar. Specific, individual, impossible to confuse with projections of my own mind. That night, I started testing the boundaries of my confinement. The door to my room locked automatically at 10 p.m., but I discovered that the lock was electronic, controlled by a keycard system. During the day, maintenance workers would prop doors open while moving equipment between buildings. If I timed it right, I might be able to access areas that weren't part of the standard patient tour. It took 3 days of careful observation before I found my opportunity. A medical technician was transferring specimens between buildings 4 and 7, using a service corridor that bypassed the main security checkpoints. When she propped open the door to building 4, I slipped inside. The storage room I'd seen from the hallway was unlocked. Inside, I found exactly what I'd expected, and worse. The photographs weren't just surveillance images, they were before and after comparisons. Pictures of people in their homes, followed by pictures of the same people in medical facilities, followed by pictures of empty houses being cleaned and restored. Janet Malloy was there. In the first photo, she was gardening in her backyard. In the second, she was lying on a gurney in what looked like a medical examination room. In the third, her house was being emptied by a moving crew. There were dozens of similar sequences. Elderly people, isolated individuals, people who lived alone and wouldn't be missed immediately, all photographed in their homes, then in medical settings, then replaced by empty houses and for sale signs. At the bottom of the stack was a photograph that made my blood run cold. It was me, sitting in my car outside 2847 Clemont Avenue, watching an empty house. But it wasn't taken during my investigation. According to the timestamp, it was taken 3 months earlier, before the first incident I remembered, before my supposed psychological breakdown. Someone had been watching me long before I started investigating Clemont Avenue. Long before I experienced the false memories and stress-related psychosis that had brought me to this place. I photographed everything with my phone, then slipped back out of the building. But when I tried to review the images later, they were gone. Not deleted, simply absent, as if I'd never taken them at all. The next morning, Dr. Chen seemed different during our session. More direct, less patient, like someone who'd run out of time for pretense. "Officer Williams, we need to discuss your discharge plan." I thought I had another week of treatment. "Your progress has been remarkable. We're confident that you're ready to return to civilian life." She slid a document across the table. It was a lease agreement for an apartment in a city I'd never visited, along with job placement information for a security company I'd never heard of. "This is your new life," she said. "Fresh start, new identity, no connection to your previous experiences in law enforcement. You'll find it very peaceful." "What if I don't want a new life?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Officer Williams, you don't have a choice. The person you used to be no longer exists. That man suffered a complete psychological breakdown and has been declared permanently disabled. This facility, this treatment, this conversation, none of it will be part of your memory after tomorrow. Memory modification, memory integration, will help your mind to organize your experiences in a way that allows you to function normally. The trauma, the false memories, the obsession with Clemont Avenue, all of it will be processed and filed away where it can't hurt you anymore." I looked at the lease agreement, at the job placement documents, at the carefully planned future that had been designed for me by people I'd never met. What happened to the real residents of Clemont Avenue? Dr. Chen closed her file. "There were no real residents, Officer Williams. There was only your mind, creating elaborate scenarios to cope with trauma you couldn't process. But I could still smell bleach. Faint, but unmistakable. The scent of something that had been cleaned away, erased, made to disappear without a trace. That night, as I lay in my comfortable bed in my locked room, I understood what was happening. This wasn't a medical facility. It wasn't a research center. It was a processing plant designed to take people who'd seen too much, known too much, remembered too much, and transform them into manageable problems. Tomorrow, they would erase my memories, give me a new identity, and send me away to live a life that had been carefully designed to keep me quiet and compliant. The man who'd breached doors and asked questions would cease to exist, replaced by someone who worked security at shopping malls and never wondered about the smell of bleach. But tonight, for a few more hours, I was still myself. Still the officer who'd stood outside 2847 Clemont Avenue and known that something was wrong. Still the investigator who'd followed leads that officially didn't exist and found patterns that were supposed to be invisible. I closed my eyes and tried to memorize every detail of what I'd learned. Not because I thought I could resist whatever they were going to do to me, but because somewhere, in some other city, on some other street, there would be another officer like me, another person who would smell bleach where they shouldn't, who would find evidence that didn't exist, who would ask questions that no one wanted answered. And maybe, if I concentrated hard enough, if I held on to these memories with everything I had, some part of what I'd learned would survive the processing. Some fragment of truth would remain, buried deep enough to resist their cleaning, hidden well enough to emerge when it was needed most. The smell of bleach was getting stronger now, seeping under my door, filling my room with the scent of things that had been wiped away. Tomorrow I would be clean too, sanitized, processed, restored to factory settings. But tonight, I still remembered. And that was going to have to be enough. In the morning, they would ask me if I was ready to start my new life, and I would smile and say yes, because that's what they needed to hear. And somewhere in the back of my mind, in a place they couldn't reach, the smell of bleach would linger like a warning I could never quite remember receiving. It was a Tuesday night in November, around 11:30 p.m. Cold enough that your breath fogged up your visor if you weren't careful. We got the call for a barricaded suspect in Maple Ridge, one of those older apartment complexes where the hallways smell like cigarettes, and the carpet hasn't been changed since the 80s. 3-story building, narrow staircases, the kind of place where sound travels wired, and you never know if that creak is from the building settling or someone moving around. The initial report was straightforward. Domestic disturbance, male suspect armed with a knife, refusing to come out. His girlfriend had called 911, said he was having some kind of breakdown. She'd managed to get out with their 4-year-old daughter, both of them sitting in the back of a patrol car when we arrived, the little girl clutching a stuffed rabbit. I remember looking at that kid. She had these big brown eyes, and she kept asking where her daddy was. The girlfriend, Sarah, I think her name was, she was shaking. Not from the cold, from something else. Something that made me uncomfortable even then, though I couldn't put my finger on why. The tactical plan was simple. Standard procedure. We'd clear the adjacent apartments, evacuate the hallway, then make contact with the suspect. Guy's name was Marcus Webb, 26 years old, worked at a warehouse across town. No prior arrests, no history of violence, just a regular guy having what looked like a really bad night. But when we got to the 3rd floor, something felt off. The hallway was too quiet. Not just empty, quiet, in a way that made your skin crawl. The kind of quiet that makes you want to whisper even though there's no reason to. We could see Webb's apartment door at the end of the hall, 3C. The number was hanging crooked, like someone had bumped into it. Lieutenant Morrison was running point that night. Good cop, 20 years on the force, 5 with SWAT. He'd seen everything twice. When we stacked up outside Webb's door, Morrison held up his hand for us to wait. That's when I noticed his radio wasn't crackling like it should have been. Static, yeah, but no chatter from dispatch or patrol units. Just this low hum that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "Webb," Morrison called out. This is SWAT. We want to talk to you, Marcus. Your girlfriend and daughter are safe. They're worried about you. Nothing. We waited. Protocol is to give them time to process, especially if they're having a mental health crisis. But after 5 minutes of silence, Morrison made the call. We were going in. The breach was textbook. Flashbang, dynamic entry, overwhelming force. The door splintered like it was made of cardboard. The bang echoed down that hallway for what felt like forever, bouncing off the walls and ceiling until it sounded like thunder in a cave. But when we flooded into that apartment, Webb wasn't where he should have been. The living room was empty. Kitchen, clear. Bathroom, clear. Only one place left, the bedroom at the back of the unit. That's where we found him. Webb was sitting on the edge of the bed, perfectly still. No knife in his hands, no weapon at all. He was wearing a white t-shirt and jeans, barefoot, staring at the wall across from him like he was watching television. But the TV wasn't on. The room was dark, except for the streetlight coming through the window. "Marcus," Morrison said, his voice gentler now. "Marcus, can you hear me?" Webb turned his head toward us, slow and deliberate. His eyes were, I don't know how to describe them, empty but not vacant, like he was looking at something we couldn't see, something that was more real to him than we were. "She's not my daughter," he said. His voice was calm, matter of fact. "Sarah knows, that's why she called you." Morrison lowered his weapon slightly. "What do you mean, Marcus?" "I found the letters," Webb continued, still in that same flat tone. "In her jewelry box, love letters, from her supervisor at work, talking about their plans, about how they were going to take Emma and start over somewhere else." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't a breakdown, this was something else entirely. "Where are the letters now, Marcus?" Morrison asked. Webb smiled then. It was the worst smile I've ever seen. "I gave them to my lawyer, along with the paternity test results. Sarah doesn't know about the test yet." The room felt like it was shrinking. I could hear my own breathing inside my helmet, too loud, too fast. Something was very wrong here, but I couldn't put my finger on what. "Marcus," Morrison said carefully, "your girlfriend told us you were threatening her with a knife, that you wouldn't let her leave." Webb's smile got wider. "Sarah's a good actress. Always has been. She needed a reason to call you. Something that would make sure I couldn't follow her when she disappeared with Emma. That's when I realized what was bothering me. The apartment was too clean, too organized, like someone had been preparing for company. The bed Webb was sitting on was made with hospital corners. The dresser didn't have any clutter on it. Even the carpet looked like it had been vacuumed recently. "She's been planning this for months," Webb continued. "Moving money around, making copies of documents, telling people I was getting violent. Setting up her exit strategy, but she needed one more thing. She needed me to look like the bad guy." Morrison's radio crackled then, cutting through the silence. "Alpha Team, what's your status?" "We've got the suspect in custody," Morrison replied. "Stand by." But Webb wasn't in custody. He was just sitting there talking to us like we were having a conversation at a coffee shop. And something about that made my hands shake. "The thing is," Webb said, "I never called her bluff. I never demanded a paternity test. I just accepted it. Emma looked like Sarah, and Sarah said she was mine, so I believed her. For 4 years, I believed her." He reached into his pocket then, slowly, keeping his hands visible. Morrison tensed, but Webb just pulled out a piece of paper, folded into a small square. "DNA test results," he said, holding it up. "Want to guess what they say?" I didn't want to guess. I wanted to get out of that room, away from Webb's smile and his too calm voice, and the way the shadows seemed to be moving in the corners of my vision. Morrison reached for the paper, but Webb pulled it back against his chest. "Not yet," he said. "You need to understand something first. Sarah didn't just lie about Emma being mine. She lied about everything else, too." He stood up from the bed, moving with the kind of deliberate slowness that made my trigger finger itch, but his hands stayed visible, empty except for that folded paper. "She told you I was armed with a knife, right?" Webb asked. "Threatening her and Emma?" Morrison nodded. "That's what she reported. Look around," Webb said, gesturing to the room. "See any knives, any weapons at all?" I did look around then, really looked. The bedroom was sparse but clean. A bed, a dresser, a nightstand with a lamp. No clutter, no personal items scattered around. It looked more like a hotel room than a place where someone lived. "Check the kitchen," Webb continued. "Go ahead. I'll wait." Morrison motioned for Jenkins to check the kitchen while keeping his weapon trained on Webb. Jenkins came back a minute later, shaking his head. "No knives in the kitchen," Jenkins reported. "No knife block, no cutlery at all, just some plastic forks and paper plates." Webb's smile got broader. "Sarah took all the kitchen knives 3 days ago. Said she was taking them to be sharpened. Funny thing is, I've been eating takeout ever since, wondering when she was going to bring them back." Something cold was spreading through my chest. Why would she do that? "Because you can't threaten someone with a knife if you don't have one," Webb said simply. She needed to make sure her story would hold up, at least until she got what she wanted. Morrison's radio crackled again. "Alpha Team, we need you to expedite. We've got reports of shots fired across town." "Copy that," Morrison replied. "We're wrapping up here." But I wasn't ready to wrap up. Something about this whole situation felt wrong, like we were missing something important. Webb was too calm, too prepared. And those details, the missing knives, the too clean apartment, the way he kept talking about Sarah's plan, it all felt rehearsed somehow. "Marcus," I said, "what did you want to happen tonight?" He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that made my skin crawl. Not fear, not desperation, something that looked almost like gratitude. "I wanted witnesses," he said. "People who couldn't be bought or threatened or manipulated. People who would have to tell the truth about what they found here." "Which is what?" Morrison asked. Webb walked to the window, looking down at the parking lot where the patrol cars were parked. "Come see for yourself." I joined him at the window, Morrison close behind. 3 stories down, I could see Sarah sitting in the back of a patrol car, officers standing around her taking notes. She was animated, gesturing with her hands, tears streaming down her face. Emma was asleep in her arms, still clutching that stuffed rabbit. "Watch her," Webb said quietly. "Watch how she talks to them." Sarah was leaning forward, speaking intensely to the officers. Even from 3 stories up, I could see the way she was moving her hands, the way she kept looking up at our window. She was performing, I realized. This wasn't a woman in shock from a traumatic experience. This was someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "She's been practicing this conversation for weeks," Webb continued. "Rehearsing what she'd say, how she'd say it. The tears, the fear, the way she'd hold Emma. It's all choreographed." Morrison's radio crackled with static. "Alpha Team, what's your ETA?" 2 minutes, Morrison replied, but he was still staring down at Sarah. Webb turned away from the window. "You want to know what really happened tonight?" Sarah came home from work at 10:15. She found me sitting at the kitchen table, reading the letters I'd found in her jewelry box. She realized I knew about her plan, so she grabbed Emma and ran, but not before making that call. He sat back down on the bed, in exactly the same position we'd found him in. She told me she was calling 911, said she was going to tell them I was having a breakdown, that I was threatening her and Emma with a knife. She wanted to see if I'd try to stop her. And did you? Morrison asked. Webb shook his head. I just sat here, waiting. I knew you'd come. I knew you'd want to hear her side of the story first. And I knew that by the time you got up here, it wouldn't matter what I said. The narrative would already be set. That's when I understood what was happening. We weren't here to resolve a domestic dispute. We were here to provide legitimacy to a story that had already been written. Our presence, our report, our professional assessment. It would all become part of Sarah's evidence that Marcus Webb was unstable, dangerous, unfit to be around Emma. So, what's in the paper? I asked, nodding toward the DNA results still clutched in his hand. Webb's smile faded for the first time since we'd entered the room. Emma's, not mine. Never was. Sarah's been collecting child support from me for 4 years for another man's daughter. He unfolded the paper and held it out to Morrison. Her real father is David Chen, Sarah's supervisor at work, the same man she's been having an affair with for the past 2 years. Morrison took the paper, scanning it quickly. His expression changed as he read. This is dated last week. I've suspected for months, Webb said. Emma doesn't look anything like me. Different eye color, different hair texture, different blood type. But I kept telling myself it didn't matter. I loved her like she was mine. He stood up again, walked to the dresser, and pulled out a manila envelope. These are the love letters. Sarah and David discussing their plans to move in together. How they were going to take Emma and start fresh somewhere else. How they just needed to find a way to make me look like the bad guy so I wouldn't fight the custody arrangement. Morrison opened the envelope, pulling out several handwritten letters. Even from where I was standing, I could see they were dated over the past 6 months. Read the one from August, Webb said. David talks about how they need to establish a pattern of domestic violence. Suggestions about how Sarah could document my escalating behavior. Morrison found the letter Webb mentioned, his face growing darker as he read. This is conspiracy. The beautiful thing about a good lie, Webb said, is that it becomes the truth if enough people believe it. And who's going to believe the angry man over the crying mother and her frightened child? Morrison folded the letter back up, his hands shaking slightly. I'd worked with him for 3 years, and I'd never seen him look like this. Like he was questioning everything he thought he knew about the job. Marcus, Morrison said carefully, why didn't you take this to the police yourself? Why wait for tonight? Webb laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think I didn't try? Last month, I went to the precinct with the letters. Desk sergeant looked at them for about 30 seconds, then told me to work it out with a lawyer, said domestic issues weren't a police matter unless someone got hurt. He walked to the nightstand and opened the drawer, pulling out a small digital recorder. I started recording our conversations after that. Sarah talking about her plans with David, her discussing how to make me look unstable, her admitting that Emma wasn't mine. Morrison took the recorder, turning it over in his hands. You've been documenting everything. For 2 months, Webb confirmed. Every conversation, every threat, every lie. I knew it was just a matter of time before she made her move. I just didn't know when. The pieces were falling into place now, and I didn't like the picture they were forming. We hadn't walked into a domestic violence situation. We'd walked into an elaborate setup, and we were the unwitting participants. She knew you'd record her, I said. That's why she took the knives. She needed to make sure that when she called 911, the story would be about an immediate threat, not a custody dispute. Webb nodded. Sarah's smart. She's been thinking 3 steps ahead this whole time. She knew that if she could get SWAT to respond to a domestic violence call, it would carry more weight than just a regular police report. Morrison's radio crackled again. "Alpha Team, we need you to clear the scene. We've got a priority call coming in." "Copy," Morrison replied, but he made no move to leave. "Marcus, I need you to understand something. Regardless of what's been going on between you and Sarah, we still have to respond to the call as it was reported. You're still going to have to come with us." Webb stood up from the bed, holding his hands out in front of him. "I know. I've been ready for this since Sarah made the call, but I need you to promise me something." "What's that?" "Take the evidence with you, the letters, the DNA test, the recordings. Don't let them disappear into some property room where they'll never be seen again." Morrison looked at me, then back at Webb. "This is all going to come out in court anyway. If what you're saying is true, your lawyer will be able to use all of this." "My lawyer quit yesterday," Webb said quietly. "Said he couldn't represent me anymore due to a conflict of interest. Turns out, David Chen's father is a partner at the firm." The cold feeling in my stomach was spreading. "What do you mean?" "Chen's family owns half the law firms in this city. The other half do business with them. Sarah didn't just pick some random supervisor to have an affair with. She picked someone with connections. Someone who could make sure I wouldn't be able to fight back." I was starting to understand the scope of what we were dealing with. This wasn't just about a custody dispute or even fraud. This was about a systematic destruction of Webb's life, orchestrated by people with the resources to make it happen. "There's something else," Webb said, walking to the closet. "Something that's going to make this whole situation a lot more complicated." He opened the closet door and pulled out a cardboard box. Inside were dozens of photographs, documents, and what looked like surveillance equipment. "Sarah's been documenting our relationship for over a year," Webb said. "But not the way you'd think. She's been creating evidence of domestic violence that never happened." Morrison took one of the photographs. It showed Sarah with a black eye, her face tear-streaked and bruised. "When was this taken?" 3 months ago. The day after I worked a double shift at the warehouse. I was home all day, sleeping. Sarah went to work in the morning looking fine, came home looking like that, said she fell down the stairs at work." Webb pulled out another photograph. This one showing Sarah with fingerprint bruises on her arms. This was 2 weeks later. I was at my brother's house that night helping him move. 30 people saw me there. "She's been staging abuse?" I asked. "Creating a portfolio," Webb corrected. "Evidence of escalating domestic violence. Photographs, medical records, statements from friends and co-workers about my increasingly erratic behavior." Morrison was looking through the photographs now, his face growing paler with each one. "Some of these are detailed, professional quality." "David Chen's hobby is photography," Webb said. "He helped her stage them. In fact, if you look carefully at the backgrounds, you can see they were all taken in his apartment, not here." I took one of the photographs, studying it closely. Webb was right. The furniture in the background was different from what was in this apartment. The lighting was different too, more sophisticated. "They've been planning this for months," Webb continued. "Building a case against me that would be impossible to refute. Who's going to believe that a woman would inflict injuries on herself just to frame someone for domestic violence?" Morrison's radio crackled with increasing urgency. "Alpha Team, we need you to clear the scene immediately. We've got an active shooter situation developing." "We have to go," Morrison said to Webb. "But I want you to know that we're going to look into all of this. Every piece of evidence, every claim." Webb smiled that same sad smile. "No, you won't. because by tomorrow morning, all of this will be irrelevant. Sarah will have her restraining order, her emergency custody ruling, and her moving truck, and I'll be sitting in a cell wondering how I let this happen. He was right, and we all knew it. The system was designed to protect women and children from domestic violence, which meant it could be manipulated by someone who understood how to exploit those protections. "There's one more thing," Webb said, pulling a final document from the box. "Sarah's been planning to disappear with Emma for months. She's already enrolled Emma in a preschool in Portland under a different name." Morrison took the document, a preschool enrollment form filled out in Sarah's handwriting. The name on the form was Emma Chen, not Emma Webb. "She's been using David's last name," Webb said. "They've been presenting themselves as a family for months. This whole thing tonight, it's not about getting me arrested. It's about buying time for them to disappear before anyone can question their story." That's when I realized what we were really dealing with. We weren't just witnesses to a custody dispute. We were accessories to a kidnapping that hadn't happened yet. Morrison was studying the enrollment form when his radio exploded with chatter. "All units, we have shots fired at the Oak Street Shopping Center. Multiple casualties reported. Alpha Team, we need you to respond immediately." "Copy that," Morrison replied, but he was still looking at the document in his hands. "Marcus, we need to—" "Go," Webb interrupted. "People are hurt. That's more important than my problems." But I couldn't let it go. Something about this whole situation was eating at me. Something beyond just the complexity of the fraud Sarah had orchestrated. "The timing," I said suddenly. "The timing of this call tonight, it's not a coincidence." Morrison looked at me. "What do you mean?" I pulled out my phone, checking the time. "It's 12:47 a.m. Sarah called this in at 11:30. That's an hour and 17 minutes ago. What happens when a domestic violence call takes longer than expected?" Webb's eyes widened. "Other emergencies get priority. The responding officers get pulled to more serious calls." "Exactly," I said. "Sarah didn't just call 911 to report a domestic dispute. She called to create a situation that would keep us busy for exactly long enough." Morrison's face went pale. Long enough for what? Webb walked to the window again, looking down at the parking lot. "She's not down there anymore," he said quietly. I joined him at the window. The patrol car where Sarah and Emma had been sitting was empty. The officers who had been taking her statement were gone too, presumably responding to the active shooter call. "How long have they been gone?" Morrison asked. "Long enough," Webb replied. "Sarah knew exactly how long it would take for you to clear this apartment. She knew that once you found me sitting here calmly, you'd start asking questions. She knew that other emergency calls would eventually pull the patrol officers away from her." Morrison's radio crackled again. "Alpha Team, we need your ETA. We have officers down at Oak Street." 2 minutes, Morrison replied automatically, but he was still staring out the window. I felt sick. This whole thing was a distraction. The domestic violence call, the SWAT response, even the active shooter situation, it's all connected. Webb turned away from the window. "David Chen has a brother who works dispatch. Michael Chen? He's been feeding Sarah information about call patterns, response times, when the department would be stretched thin." "You think they orchestrated the shooting?" Morrison asked. "I think they orchestrated the timing," Webb corrected. "They knew that if they could create a situation that required a SWAT response, and then create a more serious emergency, an hour later, Sarah would be left alone with just 1 or 2 patrol officers. The pieces were falling into place now, and the picture they formed was terrifying. We weren't dealing with a simple custody dispute or even an elaborate fraud. We were dealing with something much more sophisticated. something that had been planned with inside knowledge of police procedures and response protocols. "We need to put out a BOLO on Sarah and Emma," I said. Morrison was already reaching for his radio when Webb held up his hand. "Wait, there's something else you need to know." He walked to the dresser and pulled out a cell phone. "This is Sarah's old phone. She thought she threw it away, but I pulled it out of the trash last week. It's still got all her text messages from the past 6 months." Morrison took the phone, scrolling through the messages. His expression grew darker with each screen. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "She's been planning this for 8 months. Every detail, every contingency." "What does it say?" I asked. Morrison held up the phone. "Text from David Chen, dated 6 months ago. My brother says the department is understaffed on weeknight shifts. If we time this right, we can have you and Emma on the road before anyone realizes what happened." Webb nodded grimly. "Keep reading." Morrison scrolled down. Another text from David, dated 4 months ago. "The fake domestic violence angle is perfect. Even if Marcus has evidence to the contrary, it'll take weeks to sort out in court. By then, we'll be established in Oregon with new identities." "New identities?" I asked. Webb reached into his pocket and pulled out a small stack of documents. "Birth certificates, social security cards, driver's licenses. All in the names Emma and Sarah Chen, all dated within the past 3 months." Morrison looked at the documents, his hands shaking. "This is identity fraud on a federal level. We're talking about serious federal crimes." "That's why they needed the domestic violence angle," Webb explained. "Sarah needed to establish that she was fleeing an abusive relationship. It gives her legal justification for disappearing with Emma, even if the custody arrangements haven't been finalized." Morrison's radio crackled with increasing urgency. "Alpha Team, we have multiple officers down. We need you here now." "Copy that," Morrison replied, but he made no move to leave. "Marcus, we need to go," Webb said firmly. "But take the evidence with you, and put out that bolo. Sarah's driving a blue Honda Civic, license plate number 7, GHJ492. She's probably already on I-84 heading west." Morrison looked at me, then back at Webb. "This isn't over. We're going to follow up on all of this." "No, you're not," Webb said with that same sad smile. "Because by the time you get back from Oak Street, I'll be in lockup, and all of this evidence will be filed away as the desperate lies of a man trying to avoid domestic violence charges." He was right, and we all knew it. The system was designed to move quickly in domestic violence cases, which meant there wouldn't be time for a thorough investigation of Webb's claims before Sarah and Emma were long gone. "There's one more thing," Webb said, pulling a final document from his pocket. "Sarah's been in contact with a woman named Jennifer Martinez in Portland, another single mother with a daughter Emma's age. They've been planning to switch the children's identities once they get to Oregon." Morrison took the document, printed emails between Sarah and this Jennifer Martinez. Switch identities? Emma disappears. Jennifer's daughter becomes Emma Chen. Sarah gets a new identity as Jennifer Martinez. Perfect cover story. 2 single mothers, helping each other start over after leaving abusive relationships. I felt like I was going to be sick. "They're trafficking children. They're creating a network," Webb corrected. "Sarah's not the only one doing this. There are at least 6 other women involved, all with similar stories, all with connections to the Chen family." Morrison's radio exploded with static and shouting. "Alpha Team, we have an officer down. We need you here immediately." "We have to go," Morrison said to Webb, "but I promise you, we're going to stop this." Webb held out his hands ready to be cuffed. I know you'll try, but you're fighting a system they've been manipulating for months. They've thought of everything." As Morrison placed the handcuffs on Webb, I caught sight of something on the nightstand I hadn't noticed before. A small digital clock, unplugged, its display dark. But underneath it was a piece of paper with numbers written on it. Times, dates, and what looked like license plate numbers. "What's that?" I asked. Webb glanced at the paper. "Sarah's been meeting with David Chen and his associates for months. I've been documenting their meetings, their vehicles, their patterns. Everything's on that paper." I picked up the paper, scanning the information. It was a detailed log of surveillance with times, locations, and descriptions of people and vehicles. Webb hadn't just been a victim. He'd been conducting his own investigation. "How long have you known?" Morrison asked. "Since March," Webb replied. "I started getting suspicious when Sarah began asking questions about my work schedule, my finances, my family. She was gathering information, but I didn't understand why until I found the first letter." Morrison's radio crackled again. "Alpha Team, we need you to respond immediately. We have multiple casualties." "Copy that," Morrison replied. "We're en route." But as we prepared to leave the apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were making a terrible mistake. That by walking away from this situation, we were allowing something much worse to happen. As we led Webb out of the apartment, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The hallway that had been empty when we arrived was now occupied by a single figure at the far end, near the stairwell. A woman in a dark coat, watching us. "Morrison," I whispered, nodding toward the figure. Morrison looked, his hand instinctively moving to his weapon. "Ma'am, you need to clear the area. This is a police operation." The woman stepped forward, and I could see her face in the dim hallway light. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair and an expression that seemed oddly familiar. "Officers," she said, her voice carrying clearly down the hallway. "I'm Jennifer Martinez. I think there's been a mistake." Webb stopped walking, his entire body tensing. "That's her," he said quietly. "The woman from Portland." Jennifer Martinez walked toward us, her hands visible but moving with the kind of confidence that suggested she wasn't afraid of armed police officers. "I've been trying to reach Sarah Chen all evening. She was supposed to meet me at the train station at midnight." Morrison exchanged a look with me. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to step back. This is an active police situation." "I understand," Jennifer replied, but she didn't step back. Instead, she pulled out a cell phone. "But I think you should know that Sarah Chen called me 2 hours ago. She said she was in trouble, that her ex-boyfriend was threatening her and her daughter." Webb laughed bitterly. "Her ex-boyfriend? I'm her current boyfriend. We live together." Jennifer looked at Webb with what appeared to be genuine surprise. "Sarah told me she'd been living alone with Emma for the past 6 months. She said her ex-boyfriend had been stalking her, threatening to take Emma away." Morrison was getting that look again, the one that said he was questioning everything he thought he knew about the situation. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us. We have some questions." "Of course," Jennifer replied. "But first, I think you should know that Sarah never showed up at the train station. And when I tried to call her, her phone went straight to voicemail." I felt that familiar cold sensation spreading through my chest. "When exactly did you last speak with her?" Jennifer checked her phone. "At 11:15 p.m., she said she was calling the police about her ex-boyfriend, and that she'd meet me at the station by midnight with Emma." "The train station?" Morrison asked. "Union Station," Jennifer confirmed. "Sarah bought tickets for the 12:30 a.m. train to Portland. She said it was important that they leave tonight, that her ex-boyfriend was becoming increasingly dangerous." Webb was shaking his head. This is exactly what I was trying to tell you. Sarah's been setting this up for months. She's been telling everyone a different story, making sure that no matter who you talked to, you'd get confirmation that I was the problem. Morrison's radio crackled with static. Alpha Team, we need your immediate response. We have confirmed multiple casualties at Oak Street. Copy that, Morrison replied, but he was staring at Jennifer Martinez with a new understanding. Ma'am, we need you to come with us. We're going to need a full statement. I understand, Jennifer said, but I'm worried about Sarah and Emma. If they didn't make it to the train station, where are they? That's when I realized what was happening. Jennifer Martinez wasn't part of Sarah's plan. She was another victim, another person who had been manipulated with a carefully crafted story. Sarah had been using her as a backup plan, a way to establish credibility for her fake domestic violence narrative. Jennifer, I said, how did you meet Sarah? Through a support group for single mothers, Jennifer replied. She contacted me about 3 months ago, said she was planning to leave an abusive relationship and needed help getting established in Portland. Webb was nodding. Sarah's been building a network of alibis, people who would corroborate her story without realizing they were being used. Morrison looked at his watch. It's 1:15 a.m. The train to Portland left 45 minutes ago. Without Sarah and Emma, Jennifer added. I waited until 12:45, then came here looking for them. I was starting to understand the full scope of Sarah's deception. She hadn't just been planning to disappear with Emma. She'd been creating multiple layers of misdirection, making sure that even if one part of her plan failed, there would be other explanations that would keep investigators busy while she executed her real escape plan. Jennifer, Morrison said, we need you to tell us everything Sarah told you about her situation. Every detail, no matter how small. She said her ex-boyfriend was a warehouse worker named Marcus Webb, Jennifer began. She said he'd been increasingly violent over the past few months, that she was afraid for her life and her daughter's safety. Webb closed his eyes. Even the details are perfect. She gave you just enough truth to make the lies believable. She showed me pictures of bruises, Jennifer continued. Said Marcus had been hitting her, threatening to kill her if she tried to leave. Did you ever see Marcus? Morrison asked. Jennifer shook her head. Sarah said it was too dangerous, that he'd been stalking her, following her to work, threatening her friends. She said she couldn't risk putting me in danger by letting him know about our connection. Morrison's radio crackled again, this time with a different kind of urgency. Alpha Team, we have a problem. The Oak Street situation has been contained, but we need you to respond to a new priority call. What kind of call? Morrison asked. Missing child, 4-year-old girl named Emma Webb. Mother reported that the child's father abducted her approximately 2 hours ago. Webb's face went white. That's impossible. I've been sitting in that apartment all night. Morrison looked at me, then at Jennifer, then back at Webb. Who reported the child missing? David Chen, came the response over the radio. He's the mother's boyfriend. Says Marcus Webb broke into their apartment and took the child while Chen was at work. The pieces were falling into place now, and the picture they formed was even more sinister than I'd initially imagined. Sarah hadn't just disappeared with Emma. She'd created a situation where Marcus would be blamed for kidnapping a child that everyone now believed was in danger. David Chen is filing a missing child report? Webb asked, his voice hollow. He's not even Emma's father. Morrison's radio crackled again. All units, be advised we have an Amber Alert being issued for Emma Webb, age 4. Suspect is Marcus Webb, considered armed and dangerous. Jennifer Martinez looked confused. But Marcus is right here. How could he have taken Emma? That's when I understood the full brilliance of Sarah's plan. She hadn't just created reasonable doubt about Webb's character. She'd created a situation where his presence in police custody would actually work against him. While we'd been questioning him in his apartment, David Chen had been establishing an alibi and filing a false kidnapping report. "This is what they planned all along," Webb said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah knew that once you found me here, you'd start questioning her story. So they created a backup narrative, one where I'm not just abusive, but where I've actually kidnapped Emma." Morrison was staring at his radio like it had personally betrayed him. "The timeline doesn't work. You've been with us for over an hour." "Try explaining that to a judge," Webb replied. "David Chen will testify that he came home from work at midnight to find his apartment ransacked and Emma missing. He'll say Sarah was unconscious, that I must have drugged her before taking Emma." Jennifer pulled out her phone, scrolling through text messages. "Sarah sent me a message at 11:45 p.m. She said she was at David's apartment, that Marcus had found them and was trying to break in. While we were talking to him in his bedroom," I said. "It's impossible." "Is it?" Webb asked. "Who's going to believe that Sarah sent you a fake text message while I was supposedly threatening her with a knife? The story's too elaborate, too coordinated. It must be true." Morrison's radio exploded with chatter. Multiple units were now responding to the missing child call. Roadblocks were being set up. The FBI was being notified. All for a kidnapping that never happened, orchestrated by a woman who was probably already 3 states away. "We need to get down to David Chen's apartment," Morrison said. "We need to see what's really going on." "No," Webb said firmly. "You need to understand something first. David Chen's apartment is going to be perfectly staged. Sarah's going to be there, disoriented and injured, with no memory of what happened. There will be signs of a struggle, evidence that someone broke in. My fingerprints will be found because I helped Sarah move some furniture there last month." Jennifer was reading through more text messages on her phone. "Sarah sent me another message at 12:15 a.m. She said Marcus had taken Emma and that she was hurt, that she needed me to call the police." "But you didn't call the police," Morrison observed. "No," Jennifer replied, "because I was already here looking for Sarah. I thought she might be lying about being hurt to avoid explaining why she'd missed the train." Webb looked at Jennifer with something that might have been sympathy. "She's been using you too. Sarah needed someone who could provide an independent timeline, someone who would be confused enough about the details to support whatever story the police developed." Morrison's radio crackled with an update. "All units, we have confirmation that Emma Webb is missing from David Chen's residence. Mother is being treated for injuries consistent with physical assault." "Injuries she gave herself," Webb said bitterly. "Just like the photographs I showed you." I was starting to feel sick again. This isn't just fraud anymore. This is conspiracy to commit kidnapping, filing false police reports, obstruction of justice. "And it's working perfectly," Webb interrupted. "Because even though you know the truth, even though you have all the evidence, the system is designed to respond to missing child reports immediately. Every minute we spend talking about Sarah's deception is another minute that Emma gets further away." Morrison looked at his watch. "It's been 2.5 hours since this started. If Sarah's really trying to leave the state with Emma, she could be anywhere by now." "She's not leaving the state," Webb said quietly. "Not yet." "What do you mean?" Webb walked to the window again, looking out at the parking lot. "Sarah's too smart to run immediately. She knows that kidnapping charges bring federal involvement, longer prison sentences, more resources dedicated to finding her. She's going to wait." "Wait for what?" for you to arrest me," Webb replied. "For the news reports about the dangerous father who kidnapped his daughter, for public sympathy to build around the poor mother who survived a violent assault. She's going to let the story develop for a few days, maybe a week, then she'll find Emma somewhere. Probably claim that Emma escaped and found her way back home." Jennifer was staring at Webb with growing horror. "But where's Emma now?" "Safe," Webb said. "Sarah would never hurt Emma. She loves that little girl, even if she's been using her as a pawn. Emma's probably with one of Sarah's friends or relatives, people who believe they're helping protect a child from an abusive father." Morrison's radio crackled again. "Alpha Team, we need you to respond to David Chen's address immediately. We have a crime scene that needs to be processed." "Copy that," Morrison replied. "We're en route." But as we prepared to leave the apartment again, Webb held up his hand. "Before you go," he said, "there's something else you need to know. Something that's going to make this whole situation even more complicated." He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small digital device, about the size of a thumb drive. "GPS tracker," he said. "I put it on Sarah's car 3 weeks ago when I started getting suspicious about her late-night trips." Morrison took the device, turning it over in his hands. "You've been tracking her movements?" "Every trip to David Chen's apartment, every meeting with Jennifer Martinez, every stop at the bank or the lawyer's office. It's all documented." Webb pulled out his phone, opening an app that showed a map dotted with location pins. "Sarah's car is currently parked at a storage facility on the south side of town. It's been there since 11:45 p.m. Morrison stared at the phone screen. 45 minutes after she supposedly fled from David Chen's apartment. "The storage facility is where they've been keeping all the supplies for their new identities," Webb explained. "Birth certificates, driver's licenses, cash, probably even a different car." I felt that familiar cold sensation again. She's been there this whole time, while we've been running around responding to emergency calls, while David Chen's been filing missing person reports. Sarah's been calmly executing the final phase of her plan. Morrison's radio crackled with increasing urgency. "All units, we need to expand the search for Emma Webb. We have reports of a man matching Marcus Webb's description seen at several locations around the city." Webb laughed bitterly. "More witnesses, more people who will swear they saw me driving around with Emma, even though I've been in police custody all night." "How is that possible?" Jennifer asked. "David Chen has a brother who looks similar to me," Webb explained. "Same height, same build, same hair color. They've probably been using him to create sightings, establish a trail that will support their kidnapping narrative." Morrison was staring at the GPS tracking app on Webb's phone. "The storage facility, what's the address?" Webb read off the address and Morrison immediately called it in. "All units, we have a possible location for the suspect vehicle in the Emma Webb kidnapping. Storage facility at 2847 Industrial Boulevard." "You're making a mistake," Webb said quietly. "If you send patrol cars there now, Sarah will see them coming. She'll abandon whatever she's doing and disappear for real this time." Morrison paused, his hand on his radio. "What do you suggest?" "Take me with you," Webb said. "Let me talk to her. She's not going to run if she thinks she still has control of the situation." I could see Morrison wrestling with the decision. Everything about this case had violated standard procedure, had challenged everything we thought we knew about domestic violence calls and missing child reports. But Webb's information had been accurate so far, and time was running out. "This could be a trap," I said to Morrison. "Webb could be leading us into something worse. Or it could be our only chance to find Emma before Sarah really does disappear," Morrison replied. Webb looked at both of us with those same empty but not vacant eyes I'd noticed when we first found him. I know you don't trust me. I know this whole situation sounds impossible, but Emma's out there somewhere, and Sarah's the only one who knows where she is. Morrison made the decision. We'll take you to the storage facility, but if this is some kind of setup, if you're lying about any of this, then you'll arrest me for kidnapping and Sarah will get exactly what she wanted, Webb finished. I understand the stakes. The drive to the storage facility took 12 minutes through empty streets that felt like they belonged to a different city. Morrison drove while I sat in the back with Webb, who stared out the window with an expression I couldn't read. Jennifer Martinez followed in her own car, insisting that she needed to see this through to the end. The storage facility was one of those sprawling complexes surrounded by chain-link fence and floodlights, the kind of place that looked abandoned during the day and genuinely threatening at night. We could see Sarah's blue Honda Civic parked near the back of the complex, exactly where Webb's GPS tracker had indicated. Morrison cut the engine, and we sat in the darkness for a moment, studying the scene. The Honda was parked in front of Unit 247, and we could see light coming from underneath the metal roll-up door. She's still in there, Webb said quietly, probably transferring items to a different vehicle. Morrison's radio crackled with an update. All units, we have additional sightings of Marcus Webb and Emma at locations across the city. Subject appears to be driving erratically. More false sightings, Webb said. David Chen's brother is doing a good job selling the desperate father narrative. I was studying the storage unit through my binoculars. I can see movement inside. At least one person, maybe two. Morrison made a decision. We're going to approach on foot. Webb, you stay in the car until we give you the all clear. She won't talk to you, Webb said. Sarah's been preparing for this moment for months. She'll have a story ready, probably claim that she's been hiding from me, that she was afraid to contact police because she thought I had connections inside the department. Morrison paused. Connections? My cousin works dispatch, Webb explained. Sarah knows that. She'll use it to explain why she couldn't trust official channels, why she had to handle this herself. The complexity of Sarah's planning was staggering. Every detail, every potential complication, every possible response from law enforcement. She'd anticipated it all, and created explanations that would support her narrative. There's something else, Webb said as Morrison and I prepared to exit the vehicle. When you talk to Sarah, pay attention to her injuries, the ones she's supposedly sustained from my attack tonight. What about them? They'll be consistent with the photographs I showed you earlier. Same location, same severity, because they're the same injuries, just refreshed. Morrison stared at Webb. You think she re-injured herself tonight? I think Sarah's been maintaining a portfolio of visible injuries for months, Webb replied. Keeping them fresh, documenting them, making sure they'd be available when she needed them for evidence. I felt sick thinking about it. She's been systematically hurting herself to frame you for domestic violence. For months, Webb confirmed. Every photograph, every medical record, every concerned comment from friends and co-workers, it's all been building toward tonight. Morrison checked his weapon and opened the car door. Stay here. We'll signal if we need you. We approached the storage unit carefully, using the parked cars for cover. As we got closer, I could hear voices from inside the unit, Sarah's voice, and at least one other person, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. Morrison positioned himself beside the roll-up door and motioned for me to take the other side. On his signal, we would announce ourselves and demand entry. That's when I heard Emma's voice. Mommy, when can we go home? The sound of that little girl's voice cut through everything else. Whatever complex fraud Sarah had orchestrated, whatever lies she'd told or evidence she'd fabricated, Emma was really here, really frightened, really asking when she could go home. Morrison looked at me, and I could see the same conflict in his eyes that I was feeling. We were dealing with a woman who had committed multiple felonies, who had orchestrated an elaborate conspiracy to frame an innocent man. But we were also dealing with a mother who was with her daughter, and a child who sounded scared and confused. "Police!" Morrison called out. "Sarah Chen, this is Lieutenant Morrison with Metro SWAT. We need you to come out with your hands visible." The voices inside the storage unit went silent. "Sarah," Morrison continued, "we know you're in there. We have the building surrounded. Come out slowly with Emma and no one will be hurt." We waited. Seconds stretched into minutes. Then we heard movement inside the unit, the sound of someone walking toward the door. "I'm coming out," Sarah called. "But I need you to know that I'm not armed. I'm just trying to protect my daughter." The roll-up door began to rise slowly. In the harsh fluorescent light from inside the unit, I could see Sarah crouched down with Emma in her arms. The little girl was crying, clutching that same stuffed rabbit we'd seen hours earlier. But it was Sarah's appearance that made me stop breathing for a moment. Her face was bruised and swollen, consistent with the recent physical trauma. Her clothes were torn, and I could see what looked like defensive wounds on her arms and hands. "Please don't hurt us," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "I know Marcus sent you, but I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just trying to keep Emma safe." Morrison kept his weapon lowered, but ready. "Sarah, we need you to put Emma down and step away from her." "No," Sarah replied, holding Emma tighter. "You don't understand. Marcus has been threatening to kill both of us. I had to get Emma away from him." "Sarah," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "Marcus is in police custody. He can't hurt you anymore." Sarah's eyes widened with what appeared to be genuine surprise. "He's in custody? When? How?" "We arrested him at his apartment 2 hours ago," Morrison replied. "He's been with us all night." Sarah's expression changed then, cycling through what looked like confusion, relief, and something else I couldn't identify. But he took Emma. He broke into David's apartment and took her. David saw him leaving with her. "That's not possible," Morrison said. "Marcus has been in police custody since before midnight." I watched Sarah's face carefully as Morrison spoke, looking for any sign that she was processing information she already knew. But her confusion appeared genuine, as if she was hearing about Marcus's arrest for the first time. "I don't understand," Sarah said, setting Emma down but keeping the child close to her side. "If Marcus didn't take Emma, then who did, and why am I here?" Morrison and I exchanged glances. Either Sarah was an exceptionally good actress, or something else was happening here. Something we hadn't anticipated. "Sarah," Morrison said carefully, "what do you remember about tonight?" "I was at David's apartment," Sarah replied, touching the bruises on her face gingerly. "Marcus broke in around midnight. He was furious about something, screaming about letters and DNA tests. He hit me, and I blacked out." She looked down at Emma, who was still crying softly. "When I woke up, Emma was gone and David was calling the police. He said Marcus had taken her." "And then what happened?" I asked. Sarah frowned, as if trying to remember. "David said we needed to find Emma ourselves, that the police might not believe us because Marcus had friends in the department. He brought me here to get supplies. Said we needed to search for Emma on our own." Morrison's radio crackled with an update. "All units, we have a new development in the Emma Webb case. David Chen has been arrested for filing a false police report." Sarah stared at Morrison's radio. David's been arrested? I don't understand. Why would he file a false report? That's when I realized what had happened. Sarah wasn't the mastermind of this conspiracy. She was another victim, just like Webb, just like Jennifer Martinez. Someone else had been pulling the strings, manipulating everyone involved to create a situation where both Sarah and Marcus would be destroyed. Sarah, I said gently, I need you to think carefully. Over the past few months, who has had access to your personal information? Who knew about your relationship with Marcus, your work schedule, your plans? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her face cycling through emotions as pieces of a puzzle began falling into place in her mind. David, she said quietly. David knew everything, but he was helping me. He loved me. Did David ever suggest that you document injuries from your relationship with Marcus? Morrison asked. Sarah nodded slowly. He said it was important to have evidence, in case Marcus ever tried to hurt Emma. He helped me take photographs, taught me how to make the injuries look realistic for the camera. Realistic? I asked. David said the injuries needed to look authentic if they were ever going to be used in court, Sarah explained. He showed me how to use makeup and lighting to make minor bruises look more severe. Morrison and I were both staring at Sarah now. Are you saying that Marcus never actually hit you? Marcus never laid a hand on me, Sarah said, tears beginning to stream down her face. David said that if I really wanted to protect Emma from her biological father, I needed to be willing to make sacrifices. He said the fake injuries were just insurance, something we'd never actually have to use. The pieces were falling into place now, and the picture they formed was more disturbing than anything we'd imagined. David Chen hadn't been helping Sarah escape an abusive relationship. He'd been systematically destroying both Sarah's and Marcus's lives for his own purposes. Sarah, Morrison said carefully, what did David tell you about Emma's paternity? Sarah's face crumpled. He said he'd done a DNA test, that Emma was his daughter, not Marcus's. He said Marcus had been lying to me for years, using me and Emma for his own purposes. And you believed him? David had proof, Sarah replied. Documents, test results, everything. He said Marcus had been forging documents to make it look like Emma was his daughter so he could collect benefits and tax credits. Morrison's radio crackled again. All units, we have confirmation that David Chen has confessed to conspiracy and fraud charges. Subject admits to orchestrating false domestic violence reports and kidnapping claims. Sarah sank to her knees, pulling Emma close to her. This is all my fault. I trusted him. I believed everything he told me. No, I said, kneeling down beside her. You're a victim here too. David Chen manipulated you just like he manipulated everyone else. Emma looked up at her mother with those same big brown eyes I'd noticed hours earlier. Mommy, can we go home now? I want to see Daddy. Sarah looked at Emma, then at Morrison and me. She means Marcus, doesn't she? Marcus is her real father. Morrison nodded. The DNA test that Marcus showed us indicated that Emma is his biological daughter. David Chen lied to you about the paternity results. But why? Sarah asked. Why would David do this to us? That was the question that had been bothering me all night. What did David Chen gain from destroying two families and traumatizing a 4-year-old child? We brought Sarah and Emma back to the station where the full scope of David Chen's manipulation began to unravel. What we discovered in the following hours changed everything. I thought I understood about the case, and about the nature of deception itself. David Chen wasn't just Sarah's supervisor at work. He was a licensed private investigator with a side business in what he called relationship consulting. For the past 2 years, he'd been systematically identifying couples with relationship problems and inserting himself into their lives as a helpful friend or romantic interest. His method was sophisticated and deeply psychological. He would identify women who were financially vulnerable or emotionally isolated, then slowly convince them that their partners were abusive, unfaithful, or dangerous. Once he'd established himself as their protector and confidant, he would help them document evidence of abuse that didn't exist, plan escapes from relationships that weren't actually threatening, and ultimately disappear with whatever assets they could liquidate. Sarah had been his most ambitious project, but she wasn't his first victim. Detective Reynolds from Financial Crimes walked us through the evidence they'd recovered from David Chen's apartment and office. Bank records showed that over the past 3 years, Chen had helped at least 8 different women escape abusive relationships, each time walking away with a substantial financial settlement. The pattern is always the same, Reynolds explained. Chen identifies a target through his work or social connections. He becomes their confidant, their protector, their romantic interest. He convinces them that their current partner is dangerous, helps them fabricate evidence of abuse, then assists them in liquidating assets and disappearing. And then, what happens to the women? Morrison asked. Reynolds pulled out a thick file folder. That's where it gets really dark. Once Chen has helped them disappear, he abandons them, leaves them stranded in unfamiliar cities with false identities and no resources. Most of them end up homeless, unable to return to their old lives because they've burned all their bridges with fabricated abuse allegations. I felt sick thinking about it. What about their children? Chen has connections in various states who specialize in identity fraud for minors, Reynolds continued. The children disappear into a network of illegal adoptions and human trafficking. In most cases, the mothers never see them again. Sarah was sitting in an interview room with Emma, both of them trying to process the revelation that the man who had claimed to love them had actually been planning to destroy their lives and sell Emma to strangers. How did we miss this? Morrison asked. How did Chen operate for 3 years without anyone catching on? Reynolds showed us a map dotted with pins representing Chen's victims across multiple states. He was careful never to work the same area twice. Each victim was in a different jurisdiction, different state, different law enforcement system. By the time anyone started connecting the dots, Chen had already moved on to the next target. But Sarah was different, I observed. He stayed local, got personally involved. Why take the risk? Because Emma wasn't just another victim, Reynolds replied. Chen had been trying to have children for years. Multiple fertility treatments, multiple failed adoptions. His wife left him 18 months ago because of his obsession with having a family. The pieces were falling into place now, and the picture they formed was more disturbing than the fraud itself. David Chen hadn't been motivated primarily by money. He'd been motivated by a desperate desire to become a father, and he'd convinced himself that Emma belonged with him. Chen had been watching Sarah and Marcus for months before he made contact, Reynolds continued. He knew about their relationship problems, their financial stress, Marcus's insecurities about Emma's paternity. He engineered the entire situation to maximize the psychological pressure on both of them. Morrison was studying the evidence files. The DNA test results that Marcus showed us, were those real? Completely fabricated, Reynolds confirmed. Chen paid a medical laboratory technician to create false documentation showing that Marcus wasn't Emma's father. He used the same technique to convince Sarah that he was Emma's biological father. And the real paternity results? Reynolds pulled out an official laboratory report. Emma is Marcus Webb's biological daughter. There was never any question about it. Chen manufactured the entire paternity controversy to create conflict between Sarah and Marcus. I thought about Marcus sitting in that apartment, convinced that the child he'd raised for 4 years wasn't his daughter. The psychological torture of that deception was almost as cruel as the physical abuse Chen had helped Sarah fabricate. "There's something else," Reynolds said, pulling out another set of documents. Chen didn't just target Sarah randomly. He'd been planning this for over a year. "What do you mean?" Chen specifically requested to become Sarah's supervisor at work. He manipulated the company's staffing decisions to ensure that he'd have direct contact with her on a daily basis. He studied her background, her relationship history, her psychological profile. Everything was calculated. Morrison was shaking his head. This wasn't just fraud. This was psychological warfare. Chen had detailed files on both Sarah and Marcus, Reynolds continued. Their work schedules, their financial records, their family relationships, their personal insecurities. He knew exactly how to manipulate both of them to achieve his goals. I was beginning to understand why the case had felt so wrong from the beginning. We hadn't been dealing with a domestic violence situation or even a simple custody dispute. We'd been dealing with the end result of a sophisticated psychological manipulation campaign that had been in progress for over a year. "The other victims," Morrison asked, "were any of them able to recover their children?" Reynolds' expression darkened. "2 were. The other 6 children are still missing. Chen's network is extensive, and they're very good at making people disappear." The weight of that information settled over all of us. Emma was safe, but there were other children out there, other families destroyed by Chen's systematic cruelty. "How did Chen recruit his accomplices?" I asked. "Most of them don't realize they're accomplices," Reynolds replied. "Chen presents himself as someone who helps women escape abusive relationships. He provides them with new identities, safe houses, financial assistance. They think they're participating in an underground railroad for domestic violence victims." "Including Jennifer Martinez?" Jennifer was supposed to be Emma's new guardian once Chen established his paternal rights, Reynolds confirmed. She believed she was helping a little girl escape an abusive father. Chen showed her the same fabricated evidence he'd shown everyone else. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, processing everything we'd learned. This whole thing could have ended with Emma disappearing forever. If we hadn't questioned Webb's story, if we just processed him through the system like a routine domestic violence case. Chen was counting on that, Reynolds said. He'd studied our response protocols, our standard procedures for domestic violence calls. He knew exactly how the system would react to his carefully crafted scenario. I thought about all the decision points during the night where we could have missed the truth. If Morrison hadn't been suspicious about the timing of the calls, if Webb hadn't been so calm and prepared with evidence, if Jennifer Martinez hadn't shown up at exactly the right moment to provide contradictory information. "There's one more thing," Reynolds said, pulling out a final document. Chen had an exit strategy planned for tonight. If everything had gone according to his plan, he would have disappeared with Emma and a false identity within hours of our arresting Marcus. Where was he planning to go? Mexico, initially, then probably further south. Chen has been building escape routes for years, creating safe houses and support networks throughout Central and South America. Morrison's radio crackled with an update. "All units, David Chen has been transferred to federal custody. FBI is taking over the investigation due to interstate trafficking charges." The case was expanding beyond anything we'd initially imagined. What had started as a routine domestic violence call was now a federal investigation into human trafficking and conspiracy. "What happens to Sarah and Emma now?" I asked. Reynolds looked toward the interview room where Sarah was still holding Emma. both of them trying to understand how their lives had been manipulated so completely. "That's complicated," Reynolds replied. "Sarah participated in filing false police reports, even if she was manipulated into doing it. Emma needs psychological evaluation to understand the trauma she's experienced. And Marcus is going to need time to process what's been done to him." I thought about Marcus Webb, sitting in a holding cell somewhere in the building, probably still not fully understanding that his nightmare was over. He'd been psychologically tortured for months, convinced that the child he loved wasn't his daughter, framed for crimes he didn't commit, and manipulated into a situation where his own sanity had been called into question. "How do you recover from something like this?" Morrison asked. Reynolds was quiet for a moment. "I don't know if you do. Chen didn't just commit crimes. He destroyed the fundamental trust that holds relationships together. Sarah will never be completely sure when someone is telling her the truth. Marcus will never be completely confident in his own perceptions. Emma will grow up knowing that the adults in her life can be manipulated and deceived. That's when I realized the true scope of Chen's cruelty. He hadn't just committed fraud or kidnapping. He destroyed the psychological foundation that allows people to form healthy relationships. His victims would carry the scars of his manipulation for the rest of their lives." "There's one thing I still don't understand," Morrison said. "Why did Chen confess? Why didn't he add to his story and let the system work the way he'd planned?" Reynolds smiled grimly. "Because Marcus Webb recorded everything. Every conversation with Sarah, every meeting with Chen's associates, every piece of evidence that contradicted the official narrative. When we confronted Chen with Webb's documentation, he realized his entire plan had been compromised from the beginning. Webb knew he was being set up. Webb suspected something was wrong for months. He just didn't understand the full scope of the manipulation until it was too late to prevent it. But he documented everything just in case." I thought about Webb sitting in that apartment, calmly waiting for us to find him, prepared with evidence that would eventually expose the entire conspiracy. He'd known that the system would initially work against him, but he'd also known that the truth would eventually emerge if he could provide enough documentation. "Chen underestimated Webb," Reynolds continued. "He assumed that a warehouse worker wouldn't have the sophistication to conduct his own investigation or the persistence to document everything. He was wrong. Morrison was studying the timeline of events we'd constructed. This whole thing was like a chess game. Chen making moves, Webb making counter-moves, each of them trying to anticipate what the other would do. Except Webb was playing defense, I observed. He was just trying to protect himself and Emma. Chen was playing offense, trying to destroy them both." Reynolds nodded. "And in the end, Webb's defensive strategy worked. He provided enough evidence to expose Chen's entire operation. But as I thought about the night's events, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. Some piece of the puzzle that would explain why Chen had been so confident in his plan. Why he'd been willing to take such enormous risks for a scheme that depended on so many variables going exactly right." 3 days later, I found myself sitting in my car outside Marcus Webb's apartment building, trying to work up the courage to knock on his door. The case was officially closed. Chen was in federal custody, and Emma was back home with her father. But I hadn't been able to sleep since that night, haunted by questions that the official investigation couldn't answer. Morrison had warned me not to get personally involved, reminded me that we'd done our job and that the system had ultimately worked. But I kept thinking about Webb sitting on that bed, waiting for us to ask the right questions. About Sarah clutching Emma in that storage unit, realizing that everything she'd believed about her life was a lie. About the 6 other children who were still missing, still trapped in Chen's network of deception. I finally worked up the courage to knock. Webb answered the door, looking tired but clean-shaven, wearing civilian clothes instead of the white t-shirt and jeans he'd been wearing the night we arrested him. "Officer," he started, then paused. "I'm sorry, I don't remember your name." "Detective Sullivan," I replied. "I was part of the SWAT team that responded to your apartment. I was wondering if we could talk." Webb stepped aside to let me in. The apartment looked different now, lived in rather than staged. Emma was sitting on the living room floor, playing with blocks and humming to herself. She looked up when I entered and gave me a shy wave. "Emma, say hello to Detective Sullivan," Webb said gently. "Hello," Emma said in a small voice, then returned to her blocks. Webb gestured toward the kitchen table. "Coffee, please." We sat at the table where Webb had first discovered Chen's letters, where this whole nightmare had begun. Webb poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs and sat down across from me. "How are you doing?" I asked. Webb was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to call and tell me this was all a mistake, that I'm still under investigation, that Emma isn't really mine. The DNA test confirmed—" "I know what the test confirmed," Webb interrupted gently. "But after months of being told that everything I believed was wrong, it's hard to trust anything, even the truth." I understood what he meant. Chen's manipulation had been so complete, so sophisticated, that even his victims who knew they'd been lied to couldn't fully trust their own perceptions anymore. "There's something I need to ask you," I said. "Something that's been bothering me since that night." Webb nodded. "Go ahead." "You were prepared. Too prepared. The evidence, the recordings, the way you handled the interrogation, it was like you knew exactly what was going to happen." Webb was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. "I've been wondering when someone would ask me that question. And Chen wasn't the only one who knew how to plan ahead," Webb said finally. "I'd been documenting his activities for months, building a case against him. But I also knew that when the confrontation finally came, I wouldn't be able to control the narrative. Chen had too many advantages, too many connections. So you set up your own trap." Webb nodded. "I knew that eventually Chen would push Sarah to call the police. I knew that when SWAT responded, you'd find me exactly where I wanted to be found. Calm, prepared, with evidence that would eventually expose the truth. You manipulated the situation just like Chen did." "No," Webb said firmly. "Chen destroyed lives for his own benefit. I documented the truth to protect my daughter. There's a difference." I wasn't sure there was as much difference as Webb claimed, but I understood his reasoning. When you're fighting someone who uses the system against you, sometimes you have to use the system's own mechanisms to survive. "The night we found you," I continued, "you seemed almost relieved when we arrested you. Why?" Webb glanced toward the living room where Emma was still playing, making sure she couldn't hear our conversation. "Because I knew that once I was in police custody with witnesses, Chen's plan would start to unravel. He'd been counting on chaos, on confusion, on everyone reacting emotionally instead of asking questions. But you couldn't have known we'd believe your evidence." "No," Webb admitted, "but I knew that if I stayed calm, if I presented facts instead of emotions, eventually someone would start asking the right questions. I just had to trust that the truth would be stronger than Chen's lies." Emma looked up from her blocks and called out, "Daddy, can we have mac and cheese for lunch?" "Of course, sweetheart," Webb replied, his voice softening in a way that made something in my chest tighten. "There's something else," I said quietly. "The other victims, the children who are still missing. The FBI is working the case, but Chen's network is extensive. Some of those kids may never be found. Webb's expression darkened. I know. I've been thinking about that every night since this ended, wondering if there was something more I could have done, some way I could have exposed Chen earlier. You did everything you could. You saved Emma. But what about the others? Webb asked. What about the families Chen destroyed before he got to us? What about the women who are still out there, convinced they're protecting their children from abusive partners who never hurt them? That was the question that had been keeping me awake. Chen's operation had been running for years, and we'd only uncovered the surface of it. How many other Marcus Webbs were sitting in jail cells right now, convicted of crimes they didn't commit? How many other Sarahs were living with false identities, cut off from their real families, believing lies about their past? The FBI is working with other jurisdictions, I said. They're reviewing cases, looking for patterns. That could take years, Webb replied. And in the meantime, Chen's associates are probably destroying evidence, covering their tracks, maybe even continuing the operation without him. Webb was right, and we both knew it. Chen's arrest was just one victory in a much larger war against a sophisticated criminal network that had perfected the art of exploiting the system's protections for vulnerable people. There's something I need to tell you, Webb said, lowering his voice even further. Something I didn't tell the FBI because I wasn't sure they'd believe me. What? Webb stood up and walked to a cabinet in the kitchen, pulling out a manila folder. Chen didn't just target random families. He had a specific type of victim he was looking for. He opened the folder, revealing photographs and documents I hadn't seen before. Single mothers with young children, modest incomes, limited family support. But that wasn't the only criteria. Webb showed me a series of photographs, all showing women who looked remarkably similar. Same height, same hair color, same general facial structure. They all look alike, I observed. Not just alike, Webb corrected. They all look like Chen's ex-wife. I stared at the photographs, seeing the resemblance now that Webb had pointed it out. He was recreating his marriage. Chen's ex-wife left him because of his obsession with having children. She took their adopted daughter with her, disappeared completely. Chen couldn't find them, couldn't get them back. So, he started creating substitute families. The psychological profile was becoming clearer now. Chen wasn't just a criminal. He was a man trying to reconstruct a life that had been taken away from him, using victims who resembled the family he'd lost. The children he took, Webb continued. They were all around the same age as his adopted daughter when his wife left. He was trying to recreate not just a family, but a specific moment in time. How did you figure this out? Webb pulled out another document, a private investigator's report. I hired someone to look into Chen's background after I started getting suspicious. This is what they found. The report detailed Chen's marriage, his fertility struggles, his increasingly erratic behavior as his wife became more distant. It painted a picture of a man whose desperate desire for a family had gradually transformed into something darker and more predatory. Chen's ex-wife and daughter are in witness protection now, Webb continued. Have been for 2 years. Chen had been stalking them, threatening them, trying to force them to come back to him. So, when he couldn't get his real family back, he started stealing other people's families and reshaping them to match his fantasy, Webb finished. The women all had to look like his ex-wife. The children all had to be the right age to replace his adopted daughter, and the men all had to be eliminated somehow. I thought about the other victims Reynolds had described, the families Chen had destroyed across multiple states. In every case, He'd convinced a woman that her partner was dangerous, helped her disappear with her children, then abandoned her once he'd taken what he wanted. The children who disappeared into his network, I said, they weren't being sold for adoption. They were being used to fulfill Chen's fantasy of having the perfect family. Webb nodded grimly, and when the children got too old, when they no longer matched his vision of his adopted daughter, he'd discard them and find new ones. The scope of Chen's crimes was even more horrifying than we'd initially understood. He wasn't just a fraudster or even a kidnapper. He was a serial predator who used the legal system itself as a weapon to destroy families and steal children. "Why didn't you tell the FBI about this?" I asked. "Because Chen's ex-wife is still in hiding," Webb replied. "If her location gets out during the investigation, if Chen's associates realize she's the key to understanding his motivations, she and her daughter could be in danger." Webb was protecting other victims, even at the cost of potentially limiting the investigation into Chen's crimes. It was the kind of moral complexity that made my head hurt and my chest feel tight. "There's something else," Webb said, pulling out one final document. Chen kept detailed records of his operations, not just the financial aspects, but psychological profiles of his victims, assessment of their vulnerabilities, predictions about how they'd react to different forms of manipulation. The document was a clinical analysis of Sarah's personality, written in Chen's handwriting. It detailed her insecurities, her relationship patterns, her emotional triggers. It read like a psychological warfare manual designed specifically to destroy one person's life. "He studied her for months before making contact," Webb continued. "Learned everything about her psychology, her fears, her dreams. Then he crafted a manipulation campaign designed to exploit every weakness she had." I read through Chen's notes about Sarah, feeling sick at the clinical precision with which he'd planned her destruction. He'd identified her desire for financial security, her fear of being alone, her guilt about Emma's relationship with Marcus. Then he'd systematically exploited each of these vulnerabilities to turn her against the man who loved her. "The most disturbing part," Webb said, "is that Chen documented his techniques so he could refine them for future victims. Each woman he targeted, he learned something new about manipulation. He was perfecting his methods. Like a serial killer who gets better at killing with each victim." "Exactly. Except, instead of killing bodies, Chen was killing families, relationships, trust. And he was getting better at it every time." Emma called out from the living room again. "Daddy, I'm hungry." "Coming, sweetheart," Webb replied, then turned back to me. "I need to ask you something. The other victims, the families Chen destroyed, are they going to get justice? Are their children going to be found?" I wished I could give him a definitive answer, but the truth was that Chen's network was vast and sophisticated. Even with his arrest, there were dozens of accomplices still out there, hundreds of false identities to track down, years of carefully constructed lies to unravel. "The FBI is doing everything they can," I said. "But cases like this, they're complex. It takes time." "Time those children don't have," Webb replied. "Every day, Chen's associates have to destroy evidence, relocate victims, cover their tracks. Every day we wait, the trail gets colder." Webb was right, and I could see the guilt eating at him. He'd saved his own daughter, but he couldn't save the others. He'd exposed Chen's operation, but he couldn't undo years of damage that had already been done. "There's something I want you to know," I said. "What you did, the way you handled this situation, it's going to help other families. The evidence you collected, the patterns you documented, they're already being used to investigate similar cases in other states. But it's not enough," Webb said quietly. "It's never going to be enough. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, still clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Daddy, you said mac and cheese." Webb smiled at his daughter, and for a moment the weight seemed to lift from his shoulders. "You're absolutely right. I did promise mac and cheese." As Webb prepared lunch for Emma, I watched them interact and tried to understand what I was seeing. Here was a man who had been systematically tortured, psychologically destroyed, framed for crimes he didn't commit. Yet he was making mac and cheese for his daughter, singing along to the song she was humming, creating a moment of normal family life despite everything they'd been through. "How do you do it?" I asked. "How do you move forward after something like this?" Webb was quiet for a moment, stirring cheese into the pasta. "You focus on what's real. Emma is real. Our relationship is real. The love we have for each other is real. Everything else, Chen's lies, the false evidence, the manipulation, none of that was ever real. But the damage is real, the trauma, the fear, the loss of trust." "Yes," Webb agreed, "but so is recovery, so is healing. So is the choice to build something better from the pieces that are left." Emma climbed into her chair at the kitchen table, and Webb served her a bowl of mac and cheese. She ate with the focused attention that only small children possess, completely absorbed in the simple pleasure of a favorite meal prepared by someone who loved her. "The hardest part," Webb continued, "isn't what Chen did to us. It's knowing that he's still doing it to other families. That somewhere right now there's another father who thinks his daughter isn't his. Another mother who's being convinced that the person she loves is dangerous. Another child who's about to lose everything she knows about her life." I watched Emma eat her lunch, oblivious to the conversation happening above her head, and I felt something I rarely experienced in my line of work: helplessness. We'd solved this case, arrested the perpetrator, saved the victims. But the victory felt incomplete, shadowed by all the victims we hadn't been able to save. "There's one more thing I need to ask you," I said. "That night, when we found you in your apartment, you were waiting for us. You knew we were coming, but you seemed calm, almost peaceful. Why?" Webb considered the question while Emma finished her lunch. "Because I knew that no matter what happened next, the truth would finally come out. For months, I'd been living in Chen's version of reality, questioning my own perceptions, wondering if I was losing my mind. When you walked through that door, I knew that other people would finally see what I'd been seeing. Even though you knew you'd be arrested, even though I knew I might never see Emma again," Webb corrected, "because the alternative was letting Chen continue to destroy our lives. At least in jail, I'd know that Emma was safe from his manipulation." Emma finished her mac and cheese and looked up at her father. "Can I watch cartoons now?" "Of course, sweetheart. But wash your hands first." Emma skipped to the kitchen sink and Webb helped her wash her hands. The simple domestic ritual felt surreal after everything we'd discussed, but it also felt important. A reminder that normal life continues even after extraordinary trauma. "Detective Sullivan," Webb said as Emma ran to the living room, "I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If you ever encounter another case like this, if you ever find yourself questioning whether a domestic violence situation is what it appears to be, ask the hard questions. Don't assume that the person who calls 911 first is telling the truth. Don't assume that the person who seems calm and prepared is guilty." "I will," I promised. "And remember that the system, our legal system, our social services, our law enforcement procedures, they're designed to protect vulnerable people. But they can also be weaponized by people who understand how to exploit them." Webb was right. Chen had turned our own protective instincts against us, used our commitment to helping domestic violence victims as a tool to destroy innocent families. It was a sobering reminder that no system is immune to manipulation by people sophisticated enough to understand its weaknesses. "There's one last thing," Webb said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Chen's still out there." "What do you mean?" "He's in federal custody." "Chen's in custody," Webb corrected. "But his network is still operating. His methods are still being used. And somewhere out there, there's probably another David Chen, studying another family, planning another manipulation campaign, completely cut off from her real life. And Chen would have moved on to his next victims." The weight of all the variables that had to align perfectly for us to uncover the truth was staggering. One missed clue, one assumption left unquestioned, one procedure followed instead of judgment exercised, and the entire case would have had a different outcome. "That's what keeps me awake at night," Webb continued. "Not what happened to us, but what's happening to other families who aren't as lucky as we were. Families who don't have someone asking the hard questions." From the living room, we could hear Emma laughing at something on television. The sound was pure and innocent, a reminder of what we'd been fighting to protect. "I keep thinking about those 6 children who are still missing," Webb said quietly, "wondering where they are, what they've been told about their real families, whether they even remember their real names." I didn't have an answer for that. The FBI was working the case, but Chen's network had been operating for years. Some of those children might never be found, might never learn the truth about their origins, might never be reunited with the families who were still looking for them. "The system failed them," Webb continued, "just like it almost failed us. And until we figure out how to prevent people like Chen from exploiting our protective instincts, it's going to keep failing other families." Webb turned away from the window and looked at me with those same empty but not vacant eyes I'd noticed the night we first met. "Detective Sullivan, I need you to understand something. What you did that night, the questions you asked, the way you refused to accept the simple explanation, you saved my daughter's life. But more than that, you proved that the system can work when the right people are willing to dig deeper." "I was just doing my job." "No," Webb said firmly. "You were doing more than your job. You were thinking, questioning, refusing to be satisfied with easy answers. That's what made the difference." Emma called out from the living room. "Daddy, come watch with me." Webb smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him. "I should go. She's been through enough trauma. She needs normal, boring, everyday life." "Of course," I said, standing up from the table. "Thank you for talking with me." "Thank you for listening," Webb replied, "and for caring enough to come back and ask the hard questions." As I walked toward the door, Webb called out one more time, "Detective Sullivan?" I turned back. "If you ever find another family going through what we went through, tell them something for me. Tell them that the truth is stronger than any lie, no matter how sophisticated the lie is. Tell them that there are people like you who will ask the right questions if they just hold on long enough." I left Webb's apartment with more questions than answers, but with a new understanding of the complexity of the work we do. We'd saved Emma, exposed Chen's operation, and prevented other families from being destroyed. But we'd also learned that evil can be sophisticated, systematic, and almost invisible to the very people trained to recognize it. The most disturbing realization was that Chen's case probably wasn't unique. Somewhere out there, other predators had learned from his techniques, had seen his success, had decided to create their own versions of his operation. And families like the Webbs were vulnerable not because they were weak or naive, but because the very systems designed to protect them could be turned against them by people who understood how to exploit trust, manipulate procedures, and weaponize bureaucracy. As I drove away from Webb's apartment, I found myself thinking about Emma, playing with her blocks and watching cartoons, completely unaware of how close she'd come to losing everything. She would grow up knowing that her father had fought for her, that strangers had asked the right questions, that the truth had ultimately prevailed. But she would also grow up in a world where people like David Chen existed, where families could be destroyed by sophisticated lies, where even the people paid to protect victims could be manipulated into becoming accomplices. The case was closed, but the questions it raised would haunt me for the rest of my career. How many other David Chens were out there? How many other families were being systematically destroyed while authorities followed procedures and accepted surface explanations? How many other children would disappear into networks of false identities and fabricated histories before we learned to recognize the patterns? I never found answers to those questions, but I never stopped asking them. And sometimes, in the middle of the night when I couldn't sleep, I would remember Marcus Webb sitting on that bed, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. And I would wonder, who else is waiting for us to see through the lies?